Chapter 1152. He didn't need to look back to know who was looking at him. After all, Bosley was also outside at this moment. Kay put down his hand with a strong desire to live. In order to cover up his embarrassment, he rubbed his hand on his clothes and made a scratching gesture. Then he smiled and bumped Feng Ling's arm with his bent arm. How is it? You've been a bodyguard for so long. One moment, you're the mayor's daughter, and the next moment, you're Mrs. Mo's. Do you feel comfortable? Is it more comfortable to come back to be with us brothers? Feng Ling didn't take this step at all and directly answered. It's all good. They are all very good to me. It's very comfortable and comfortable. Kay. No wonder you're so heartless. You've already gotten back the face you lost. It's time for you to come back. Feng Ling glanced at the sniper rifle in Kay's hand. In fact, I'm also a very troublesome existence for 11 base. After all, the rules and regulations can't be disrupted because of me. Even if the higher-ups give me a suitable identity, I'm not qualified to be a drill master. I don't want to make the brothers in the other teams secretly unhappy because of my special identity, which will only make the brothers in the base unable to work together. But I will also remember the kindness of the base. If you need me, I will not hesitate to come back. Just like now, as long as you give me a gun, I can risk my life for 11 base at any time. Kay tooted. Humph, who wants you to risk your life? We just miss you. How good the days were when the 5 of us were together. Don't you miss us? I miss you, but life always goes on. People can't always look back and think about the past. As long as we are still alive, we can see each other whenever we want. We don't have to maintain the relationship of standing in a row every day to train in the base. After going out for a few years, you've become much more eloquent. In the past, you didn't even bother to explain anything to us. But now you even know how to say such polite words. Kay snorted. Feng Ling chuckled. It's not polite words. I mean it. We can see each other whenever we want. After chatting for a while, Feng Ling was about to go to the team to get a gun. But perhaps because she hadn't been too close to these people for a long time, she suddenly appeared in front of them. When she passed by, everyone glanced at her. What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a woman before? Li Nanheng went to get a gun suitable for her. When he caught a glimpse of those people's eyes, his face turned cold. Everyone. I've never seen such a feminine Feng Ling. In fact, Feng Ling's change was not particularly big, but perhaps because she had been outside for a long time and hadn't deliberately disguised as a man for 3 years, the feeling she gave people was very natural. When she was natural, it could be seen that she only had short hair, but she was really a woman from head to toe. In particular, Feng Ling habitually wore a scarf around her neck to cover up the traces that hadn't disappeared in the past 3 or 4 days. Although Cambodia was a very troublesome place, and everyone was wearing short-sleeved shirts, she did not take off her scarf. The rare red color on her body made her particularly attractive to men. Li Nanheng frowned coldly and glanced at Feng Ling indifferently. Why are you standing there? Did I ask you to come here to be admired? Feng Ling. Did this man eat a bomb? However, Li Nanheng glanced at the scarf around her neck and seemed to guess what she was covering. Although he was still unhappy because of the contraceptive pills, when he thought of the traces he left on her body, he felt a little better. But he just threw the gun into his hand and turned away with a dark face. At night, in the camp, several groups of people were responsible for patrolling at different times to ensure the safety and vigilance around the camp. Feng Ling had just finished patrolling with Kay and the others outside, and it was already past 10 o'clock in the evening when the next group of people came. Cambodia was indeed very hot. She felt uncomfortable wearing the scarf, but she didn't take it off. The others asked her why she kept wearing it, and she casually explained that she accidentally hurt her neck a few days ago. Her cervical vertebra was injured, so she couldn't be exposed to the wind, so she wore it. But when she returned to the small room in the camp, she finally took off the scarf after entering the door and closing the door. It was so hot that she was sweating all over. She quickly scrubbed and felt refreshed and comfortable before picking up a new black short-sleeved t-shirt that Kay had given her. This small room was divided into small rooms, very simple and crude, and there was no mirror. She picked up her cell phone and looked at her neck, only to see that the traces near her collarbone were still there, and there was also a little trace on the front of her neck. Normally, it had been 3 days, and all the traces should have disappeared, but Li Nanheng, that beast, probably wanted to eat her. The traces left on her body had only faded a little, but when she looked carefully, she could still see that they were all kiss marks. But it was not appropriate to keep wearing the scarf like this. Today, because she had just flown from High City, she didn't have time to change her clothes. She had been so stuffy all day, so she definitely wouldn't wear it tomorrow. She might have to find a way to get some plasters or bandages from others to cover her wounds. She hurriedly tidied up her clothes, because she felt that these clothes were sweaty, so she took them out to wash. When she was washing clothes, Tam happened to come out to wash his pants. When he saw Feng Ling, he said, "I saw that the cell phone you used in the afternoon is the same model as mine. The charger I brought seems to be broken. Did you bring your cell phone charger? Lend it to me." "Yes, I'll get it for you later." Feng Ling wrung the clothes dry, hung them on the drying pole outside, and walked quickly inside, ready to help Tam get the charger. However, when she walked to the door of the small room where she lived temporarily, she suddenly saw the opposite door open. She didn't know who lived opposite, so she pushed the door open and turned to enter her room. But when she was about to close the door, she suddenly felt a force coming from the door to stop her from closing it. She turned her eyes, only to see Li Nanheng's face colliding into her sight. The man's eyes were very unkind, as if he wanted to settle accounts with her. He pushed the door open and walked in. The moment Feng Ling saw the man's cold gaze, and the way he suddenly barged in, the scene of her being pressed on the bed by him a few days ago was still vivid in her mind. Feng Ling subconsciously took a step back, but the room was too small. After taking a step, she was already at the bedside. Her legs were blocked by the bed and she asked, "What are you doing?" Chapter 1153. Don't you know what I'm doing? Li Nanheng caught her as she almost fell back on the bed. To prevent himself from doing something to her after pressing her on the bed, he turned around and pressed her against the door. At the same time, when she was about to struggle, he raised his hand and locked the door from the inside. Surrounded by the man's breath and hearing the sound of the door being locked, Feng Ling's movements stiffened. She looked incredulously at the cold, hard, and handsome face in front of her. "You!" The man didn't give her a chance to reprimand him. He raised his hand and pinched her chin, forcing her to look into his eyes, and said in a low voice, "Did you take the medicine?" Feng Ling was puzzled and stared at him. "What medicine?" Li Nanheng pinched her chin, and the words were almost squeezed out from between his teeth. "Contraceptive pills." Feng Ling. How did he know that she bought that kind of thing? Since Jin Wan would buy it for her, she definitely wouldn't tell this kind of thing to Li Nanheng. And at that time, Jin Wan clearly thought that she was raped by Li Nanheng, and was very dissatisfied with what he did, so she definitely wouldn't tell him. Then how did he know? Feng Ling stared at him blankly for a few seconds before her eyes flickered, and she responded, "In." Then she lowered her head, and was about to slip out of the confinement circle between his body and the door. However, when the man heard her in, he seemed to be instantly angered. He pinched her chin, and his grip was much stronger than before. At the same time, his eyes were bursting with anger. "Why did you take the medicine? Even if you're really pregnant, I didn't King say that I won't take responsibility. You're not a child. You're of marriageable age. Are you afraid of pregnancy?" Feng Ling. Speak. Do you want me to be so irritable every time I talk to you? Tell me, why did you take the medicine? Li Nanheng was so angry that he wanted to break her chin. It was not because of the bet between him and grandfather Li about whether he could have a great-grandchild within a year, but because he loved her, he would do it. If she was really pregnant, he would do it. He had never felt that there would be anyone else between him and Feng Ling. Everything could be done naturally because of their relationship. In the future, if she really needed him to take contraceptive measures, he could be careful and avoid it. But if she was really pregnant, he would do it. There was no need to take any medicine at all. That kind of medicine was very harmful to women. How could she take the medicine so easily after he turned to fly back to the United States? How could she be so cold to take it? Feng Ling didn't expect him to be so angry. When she asked Jin Wan to buy medicine for her, she thought that their professional identities were suitable for an accidental pregnancy. Besides, she had known Miss Wen for a long time, and often heard Miss Wen's doctor friends talk about the experiences of girls who got pregnant accidentally. So she thought it was not the right time. Besides, she wasn't ready, so she asked Jin Wan to buy medicine for her. Jin Wan nodded, but she didn't expect that a contraceptive pill would make him so angry. Did he mean that he wanted to have a child with her? Feng Ling didn't think about it at all. She just looked at the anger in the man's eyes and found that she was speechless. Facing his eyes, she didn't know what to say. She was silent for a moment before looking into his eyes and saying, "I didn't think that much." She wanted to explain, but when the words came to her mouth, she didn't know how to say it. She was not good at expressing herself, and he seemed to be really angry. In Feng Ling's mind, she was a little confused. Did he really want a child? Seeing that she clearly wanted to say something, but in the end, she just looked at him calmly. Li Nanheng couldn't bear her attitude of being too restrained and too trapped in her own world. He suddenly raised her chin, lowered his head, and kissed her hard on the lips. In the beginning, there seemed to be a bit of anger. Although the kiss did not go deep, there was a bit of nibbling. He was determined to make her react in pain. However, seeing the little woman pressed against the door by him, her calm eyes gradually revealed some helplessness. He then saw that the corners of her eyes were a little red from his kiss. That kind of red was not because she was about to cry, but whenever she seemed to be forced into a corner by his passion, a faint blush would appear on her face out of habit. It could represent the most obvious feeling of a young girl on her body. At least under his kiss, he could directly see the reflection of her eyes with his eyes. It had to be said that Feng Ling, a woman who usually looked stubborn, when she was really helpless, her gaze was really more useful than any aphrodisiac. Just this one look was enough to make him, a man who had just had sex, want to throw her on the narrow bed next to him. In this small room that had no soundproofing at all, and was so shabby that the wooden wall could collapse at any time, he wanted to strip her clean on the spot. He wanted to tear off her clothes and leave more marks on her body, so that she would clearly remember who was her man. He wanted her to be covered with his marks from inside to outside, from top to bottom. No matter what kind of contraceptive pills she took, they would not be able to get rid of it. Feng Ling was forced to lean against the door, and was almost suffocated by the man's kiss. She raised her hand and pinched his shoulder hard to make him let go of her, and then silently accused him of his violence with her slightly red eyes. But Li Nanheng was really angry. He saw that she was extremely tired at that time. Although he planned to take her back to the United States to confront Feng Mingzhu, considering that she really wanted to rest at that time, and considering that she didn't want to acknowledge the Feng family, he left her in T-City and flew back to the United States alone to deal with Feng Mingzhu's matter. It was just a flight of more than 10 hours. He originally planned to let her have a good sleep first. She, on the other hand, actually dared to eat the medicine without even saying a word. Thinking back to all these years, when he thought that she was still a man, and that he was gay, he was willing to sacrifice his feelings for her. Later on, when he found out that she was a woman, for the sake of her dignity and what she wanted, he helped her keep her secret and slowly approached her step by step, afraid that he would scare her. Chapter 1154. But what had she done all this time? She's been hiding. If she didn't like him, it would be fine. He could just treat it as a one-sided love. It didn't mean that as long as he gave his feelings, the other person had to reciprocate with the same feelings. But she liked him. However, although she looked tough on the surface, she was timid from time to time. She was the kind of person who would be happy like a child if someone gave her a little bit of hope and sunshine. But as long as someone told her that the sunshine didn't belong to her, she would immediately go back into the darkness, curl up, and hide. Li Nanheng didn't intend to give her another chance to escape. After knowing her feelings, he just wanted to drag her out of her snail shell step by step. Behind Feng Ling's stubbornness, there was a timidity that others couldn't see. If she was allowed to be like this, she would only show her back and the back of her head to others. She looked tough, heroic and fearless, as though everyone in front of her was just a passerby. But Li Nanhing knew that this was just a layer of cold, hard shell on the outside of her fragility. He had seen the warmth and love that Feng Ling had carefully tested. It was so pure and clean. Although her reaction was always slow, it was extremely sincere. He didn't want to hide her back in her hard shell because of the misunderstanding 3 years ago. And he couldn't let her continue to be so timid. Feng Ling could no longer wear such a cold and unapproachable mask. If she was unwilling to take off this mask, he would take it off for her. But step by step until today, she used her hypocritical shell on the surface to hit the heart that he held in front of her with his hands again and again. How could she be so cruel? Feng Ling felt that the man's hand had unexpectedly reached into her clothes and was even ruthlessly trying to carve something on her body. It was very heavy, and wherever his palm passed, it was slightly painful. She bit her lips and turned her face away. Just as she was about to scold him, she suddenly heard footsteps approaching from outside. Her eyes flickered and she was about to speak. But at this moment, the man bent down and harshly pressed his lips against hers. Feng Ling immediately frowned. Under the man's angry kiss, she also stared at his black eyes angrily. She glared at him angrily, but he didn't close his eyes. The two of them looked at each other very closely, and their lips hurt. Their eyes also hurt from staring at each other, but they didn't let go. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Feng Ling's heart suddenly trembled with fright. She leaned against the door plank, which was just a very thin plank made of local trees in Cambodia. It was just a temporary war camp of 11 base, so it was very simple. When the door plank was knocked gently, she seemed to feel the vibration and force between the fingers of the person knocking on the door. Feng Ling, have you found the charger? My cell phone is running out of power. Lend it to me. Tam's voice rang outside the door, and then he knocked twice. Where are you? Didn't you say you would come in to get the charger? Are you too tired? Why don't you go to sleep? Feeling there was no response from the door, Tam knocked gently outside and muttered, Gee, women are really inconvenient. When we were brothers, we could just push the door open to get the charger. Now you are a girl. If you really fall asleep, it's not convenient for me to go in. Then he continued to knock. Don't blame me for being annoyed. My cell phone is really running out of power. Hurry up, Feng Ling. Feeling that Tam's voice was in her ear, Feng Ling instinctively held her breath. However, when the man who was pressing her against the door heard the words outside, he didn't let go of her at all. Instead, when he saw her nervousness, he suddenly sneered, lowered his head and continued to kiss her lips. When she was not paying attention, his tongue swept up, and the kiss was so deep that she almost sobbed. She tried hard to hold back her tears and glared at the man who was acting recklessly, warning him that there was someone outside. But Li Nanhing still didn't close his eyes. He kissed her deeply, entangled the stiff tip of her tongue in her mouth, and watched her expression full of worry, embarrassment, and panic, as if he could only find some comfort in her anxious expression. Seeing that she was more nervous, he kissed her deeper. Even his hands kept moving behind her, and his hands had already moved past the secret button of her underwear. Because of the movement of his hands behind her, Feng Ling only felt a layer of goosebumps on her back. She glared at him, and was so angry that she was about to bite him. However, when she opened her mouth to bite him, the man suddenly let go of her lips, pressed his forehead against hers, and whispered while panting against her lips, Tell him, there is someone in your room, man. Are you crazy? Feng Ling was so angry that she whispered, Where are you now? Mr. Mo's life is still in danger. How dare you flirt here? Before she finished speaking, she was kissed hard by the man again. Tam, who was standing outside the door, seemed to hear something, but he couldn't hear it clearly. He thought it was Feng Ling playing with her mobile phone inside. So he knocked on the door a few times and asked, Feng Ling, are you asleep or awake? Don't mess with me. I'm really waiting for the charger to be used urgently. Hearing that Tam was really anxious, Feng Ling raised her hand and pushed hard on Li Nanhing's shoulder. But the man held her tightly, sucked her lips, and continued to press his hand against the door. If she moved a little more, his hand would definitely make a clear sound on the door. Feng Ling felt as if she was threatened now. She glared at him and raised her leg to attack his lower body, but the man pressed her leg down the moment she moved, looked down at her, and said lightly, "Mo Jingshan won't die. You're not Jinwan. Why are you so anxious? I'm about to die of anger because of you. Are you really stupid, or just pretending to be stupid? Can't you tell I'm angry?" "What the hell are you angry with?" Feng Ling said angrily. "Feng Ling." Tam's voice came again from outside the door. "Who the hell are you talking to? What are you doing inside? Was there someone else in your room?" Speaking of this, Tam suddenly paused and turned to look at another room opposite this one. The door was closed, and he remembered that it seemed to be the place where Boss Lee lived recently. Chapter 1155. Looking at the door of the room for a while, Tam hesitated and walked over. He knocked on the door, but no one was there. He raised his hand and tried to push the door again, only to find that the door opened and was not locked. But there was no one in the room. But he remembered that Boss Lee was not outside at this time, and it was not the time for Boss Lee to take the lead in patrolling. So where was Boss Lee at this time? A few seconds later, Tam seemed to think of something. He suddenly turned to look at the tightly closed door of Feng Ling's room, and suddenly took a step back, as if there was a thorn in his back. He immediately cleared his throat and suddenly said, "Cough well, I'll go borrow a charger from someone else." "Feng Ling, you go ahead. Don't worry about me. I remember that Lin Cheng's cell phone model seems to be this one. I'll go borrow it from him." With that, Tam ran away as if running for his life. Hearing Tam's tone, Feng Ling knew that he must have guessed something. Feng Ling leaned against the door and rolled her eyes at the man's shoulder. When she raised her eyes again, the man took advantage of the fact that the people outside had left, and was about to pick her up and throw her onto the bed. The moment her feet left the ground, she coldly said, "I didn't take birth control pills." The man's originally angry and somewhat violent mood stagnated in an instant. His movements paused, lowering his eyes to look at the little woman in his arms, who had a cold expression on her face. "What?" "I said, I didn't take contraceptive pills." Feng Ling turned her eyes to him. Because of this posture, when she turned around, her face was very close to his. She didn't avoid him, but looked at him calmly. "I didn't take them." Feng Ling's eyes were frank and clean, without any trace of guilt. When the man raised his eyebrows, she said, "I did ask Mrs. Mo to buy contraceptive pills for me that day, but after buying them, she told me that this kind of pills would be harmful to my body, and asked me to think carefully before taking them. I was very confused at that time and didn't think clearly, so I put the pills in the drawer. In the evening," she paused and then said, "I wanted to take a bath, but I found that I was on my period." Hearing the word period, Li Nanheng frowned. Her period came at the right time. "I remember hearing from Miss Wen's doctor friend that if you forget to take your medicine after sex, and your period comes a few days later, then you don't have to worry about anything, because you definitely won't get pregnant at that stage. I just had sex with you, and my period came at night, which means that I definitely didn't win the lottery. So I simply didn't take the medicine. The medicine has been in the drawer in the bedroom," she said as she looked at him. "Today is the 3rd day of my period. If you don't believe me, you can try it yourself." Since she said so, then it must be true. There was no need to believe or not. However, Li Nanheng still instinctively carried her to sit on the bed and reached his hand down. Sure enough, he felt a soft thing under her lower body. No wonder she looked normal today. But she didn't look very well. It turned out that she was on her period. It was inevitable that she would feel a little uncomfortable after coming here from High City, but she was used to holding back her discomfort. Of course, she wouldn't easily say this kind of thing. Although it wasn't the first time that they had done it. Guning couldn't remember how many times they had done it during the night and the morning in Tea City a few days ago. Guning had touched Guning's body from head to toe. However, during her menstrual period, allowing a man to touch her lower body to see if she was really wearing a sanitary pad was really too intimate. Although it was nothing, it was really too intimate. Feng Ling didn't speak anymore, but the accusation and displeasure in her eyes were obvious. At this moment, the anger on Li Nanheng's body had also subsided, and it had completely subsided. So his anger just now was actually just a misunderstanding. At that time, he almost did something to her. He glanced at the marks left on her neck that had yet to fade, and then at her slightly pale face. He stared blankly at the way she was forcefully held in his arms. Li Nanheng coughed, slowly withdrew his hand from under her knees, and tentatively pressed it against her stomach. Then do you feel uncomfortable now? Does your stomach hurt or? My stomach hurts. Feng Ling didn't want to hide anything now, looked at him coldly, and answered directly. Li Nanheng. Facing Feng Ling, who cried in pain, he felt even more guilty in an instant. He hurriedly rubbed her stomach with his hand. Does it hurt? How long has it hurt? It has been hurting since you came in. I wanted to come back to lie down and rest after taking the charger for Tam, but the dog pressed me against the door and bit me for a long time. Feng Ling continued to look at him coldly. Li Nanheng. After a long while, he said helplessly, sorry. His hand was still slowly rubbing her stomach. Feng Ling didn't want to talk to him, and was about to get up from his arms. Although Li Nanheng was reluctant to let her go, seeing that she was really angry, he knew he had wronged her. So he quickly let her go. Feng Ling was finally free. After getting down from his legs, she reached out and pulled his shoulder, trying to make him stand up. Li Nanheng stood up. He thought she had something to say, but Feng Ling pointed to the door with a dark face. Get out. Li Nanheng. I apologize. I don't need your apology. Get out. I want to rest. Li Nanheng. I was impulsive just now. If you are really angry, you can punch me. I don't want to do anything now. Get out. Feng Ling lost her patience. She reached out and pushed him out. She pulled open the door and pushed the man out without a care. Then she closed the door. Knowing that she was angry, Li Nanheng didn't force her. After being pushed out of the door, he wanted to stand outside the door and repent. At this time, he had to admit his mistake quickly. Otherwise, this little wife would really give him the cold shoulder for several days. However, just when he was pushed out of the door, Tam, who had finally borrowed a charger from someone else's room, was happily walking here with a charger and a data cable in his hand, whistling. He was just passing by, but suddenly ran into Li Nanheng, who was pushed out of the door by Feng Ling. The two men looked at each other, and Li Nanheng glanced at him expressionlessly. With just a glance, the smile in Tam's eyes and the whistling sound in his mouth all stopped abruptly. Oh my God! The mighty and cold Boss Li was driven out of the room by Feng Ling. What should he do now? Was it too late to pretend to be blind? Kiss me for monthly votes. Chapter 1156. Tam secretly asked in his heart how to save his life now. Turn around and walk away, pretending not to see it? But his eyes had met Boss Li's eyes. Otherwise, he could just pretend not to know what had happened and continue to pass by. But just now he knocked on the door for a long time. Obviously, it seemed that he had ruined Boss Li's plan. Now Boss Li's expression seemed to be about to eat him. If he really couldn't do it, he could only poke his eyes. Cough. Tam coughed lightly, and then suddenly turned around. While touching the wall on the side, he narrowed his eyes and said, Oh, when I went to dismantle the mines nearby yesterday, my eyes may have been injured by the gunpowder in the small mine that was accidentally detonated. Why are my eyes blurred? Who is standing there, Kay? Is it you? Li Nanheng. Tam walked out with his back to him, touched the wall, and then reached out to touch his back, and then said, Oh, look at my eyes. I really can't see clearly. There's no one around me. My name is Kay. I don't know how many days it will take for my eyes to recover. Alas, I'm finished. I'm going to spend the rest of my life with these eyes. I can't see anything. With that, after walking a little further, he sped up the speed of touching the wall, and finally sped up his pace. When he reached the corner near the door, he slipped away. The next day, when everyone woke up, they found that Mrs. Mo had helped them clean up the camp, and even helped them wash the socks of the base members. The fragrance of laundry detergent wafted in the bulletproof shed of the entire camp. Mrs. Mo, you ate jerky and dried fruits all day yesterday. Today our people brought back some fish and shrimps from outside. We plan to grill some seafood near the river. You should go eat some fish too. You need nutrition every day. Feng Ling smelled the laundry detergent and walked into Jin Wan's room, only to see that Jin Wan's room was also unbelievably clean. Jin Wan insisted on doing something. She didn't want to be taken care of here doing nothing. She could understand her feelings, so Feng Ling didn't stop her. But she didn't expect Jin Wan to clean up so thoroughly. Although the men of 11 Base were not dirty, they smelled of blood and sweat. Besides, there were not many men who were obsessed with cleanliness like Li Nanheng. Most of them were careless men who were sloppy and casual. Even if the smell was not bad, the place where they were stationed didn't smell particularly good. It smelled really good now. Why did you even wash the socks? Feng Ling looked at the pairs of socks hanging outside, and then at Jin Wan's hands. Did you wash them by hand? Otherwise, you all came in such a hurry and didn't bring any daily necessities. Do you think there's a washing machine here? Jin Wan said as she swept the floor. The ground was covered with various tropical insects that had been killed by pesticides. Fortunately, the people of the base knew that this was a tropical area and brought a lot of insecticides. Otherwise, these insects crawling out of the jungle were likely to climb onto their beds. Mrs. Mo, in fact, you don't have to do anything. Mr. Mo is a very respected and important person in our eyes. You should enjoy preferential treatment here. You don't need to do these things. Feng Ling wanted to go up and help. If I don't do these things to keep myself busy, my heart will only be more chaotic. Are you worried about Mr. Mo? Jin Wan lowered her hand and held the broom. After a moment of silence, she said softly, "Although I'm worried, I believe in you and believe that he will be fine." Feng Ling said, "Those people won't easily kill Mr. Mo. If Mr. Mo doesn't hand over the confidential information of the underground arms trade, they won't dare to touch him for the time being. At present, the people of 11 Base have determined the position of the enemy in the jungle, but because there are dangerous minefields around here, we need to wait for the helicopter rescue team of the U.S. police to come and wait for the best time to ensure everyone's safety." Jin Wan nodded. "I know. If you have something to do, go ahead. You don't have to accompany me. I'll find something to do. Let's go eat fish. They are already grilling it." Jin Wan nodded. Although she had been thinking about Mo Jingshan, she knew that Feng Ling really cared about her. So she didn't continue to dawdle and followed Feng Ling out. Feng Ling didn't expect that Jin Wan, who was often protected by her, not only didn't drag them down in such a place, but even made everyone feel that Mrs. Mo's existence had become indispensable. She could wash clothes and cook. For these rough men, she was simply a goddess. Although Feng Ling was a woman, because of the environment she grew up in and living with this group of men, in some aspects, she really didn't know as much as Jin Wan did. For example, Jin Wan could make the fish they caught into fish soup and take Feng Ling to the nearby village to exchange for some food seasonings, oil, salt, and other things to make the fish soup more delicious. Even Li Nanheng, who had always been indifferent to Jin Wan, made a rare comment after tasting the fish soup Jin Wan made. It seems that Qin's sighting was telling the truth when he said that Jin Wan had become a good wife and mother. This Miss G really knows how to cook. I just didn't expect that the first time I tasted Miss G's cooking would be in such an environment. Jin Wan said, "I think you usually eat well in the base in the United States. The food here these 2 days is really too perfunctory. So you stay in Cambodia, and now you plan to stay and cook for everyone?" Li Nanheng looked at her with a faint smile. "Why can't I? Are you sure you can bear this kind of grievance?" In Li Nanheng's eyes, most women were delicate and troublesome. Even if not all of them were so delicate, they were not very useful. Except for Feng Ling, who was the only special one in his eyes, he really didn't care much about other women. As for Jin Wan, she was the woman in Mo Jingshan's heart. He couldn't treat his brother's woman too coldly. When it was time to take care of her, he would do her a favor. At this time, a little brother in the base sipped the fish soup and said, "Mrs. Mo washed all our socks this morning. There should be nothing more grievance than washing dozens of pairs of socks at once, right?" Li Nanheng immediately turned his eyes to Jin Wan, 2 seconds later he said lightly, I think we'd better let Mo Jingshan run his own course. Don't save him. Jinwan. What do you mean? Save him. And let him know that his wife is cooking for us and washing our socks here. I'm afraid the consequences won't be good. Jinwan. Everyone. Chapter 1157. When Jinwan went in with the fish soup, Li Nanhing stood still and casually glanced at Feng Ling, who was helping Jinwan distribute the fish soup to the others. Looking at her figure who kept a distance from him, he said, Sure enough, there has never been a woman in the base. It's rare to have a woman here. It feels different. Everyone could tell that Boss Li was deliberately trying to find something to talk to Feng Ling. However, Feng Ling ignored him ungratefully. When she received the looks of the other brothers, which meant that Boss was looking at her, she handed the bowl of fish soup in her hand out again, and replied expressionlessly, If you're not afraid of being poisoned to death, I don't mind cooking for you when we return to the base. The two of them were really sneak attacks against sneak attacks. Both of them were stubborn. Tam and Kay looked at each other with a smile while drinking the fish soup. They didn't know how to deal with Boss, and Feng Ling Li Nanheng looked at her back and said, There are chefs from all over the world in the base. You don't need to show your skills, but we do need a woman for this field operation. In fact, he just wanted Feng Ling to know that even if she returned to the base, she didn't need to cook, and just needed to stay by his side. But obviously, she still didn't want to accept his invitation. She ignored him, and continued to do her own things. After the fish soup was distributed, Feng Ling turned to go to the other side, but when she walked over, her wrist was suddenly held. She turned her eyes and looked at the hand on her wrist coldly. Let go. Does it still hurt? Li Nanheng glanced at her belly. He really wanted to find something to talk about, but he couldn't find a perfect way to break the ice with her attitude. Did he ask her if it hurt? Why didn't he ask her if it hurt when he pressed her down on the bed in the hotel, and in Wen Liqing's bedroom a few days ago? Why didn't he ask her if it hurt when he pressed her down and bit her for a long time yesterday? Now he knew how to care about her. Feng Ling was about to hit him away, but the brother who was still drinking the soup next to him accidentally heard Li Nanheng's words and deliberately coughed to ask, What do you mean? Does it still hurt? Feng Ling is injured. Since our boss Li asked about it in person, it must be a serious injury, right? Oh, Feng Ling, where are you hurt? Li Nanheng raised his leg and kicked him in the shoulder. Get lost. You're everywhere. The little brother chuckled and hid in the bulletproof shed with the bowl in his hands. At the same time, he tooted and glanced back thinking, Boss Li cares about Feng Ling, but they are not allowed to care about her. I told you to let go. Feng Ling saw that many of the brothers around were looking at her curiously and gossipy. She tried her best to break free from his hand. Li Nanheng never felt the need to hide anything from these people. Most of the brothers in the base could see the relationship between him and Feng Ling, so there was nothing to hide. He didn't let go of her wrist and looked sideways at her. Obviously, she was really angry with him yesterday. Behave, okay? Get lost. Feng Ling impatiently raised her leg and kicked him. At this time, Jinwan scooped another pot of fish soup and heard a strange sound in the dense forest. The brothers who came to help her carry the bowl lowered their voices and said, Mrs. Mo, don't go there. Boss and Feng Ling are fighting. Don't hurt you. Jinwan. In the past few days, although the brothers had been stationed in this place hard, waiting for the opportunity to enter and rescue, because Mrs. Mo always tried to cook delicious food, everyone's living standard had soared, and they all felt happy living in this place. In the evening, Feng Ling accompanied Jinwan for a walk by the river, talking along the way. Jinwan was not a particularly gossipy person, but she was very concerned about Feng Ling's affairs. She occasionally asked her about Li Nanheng, but Feng Ling mostly didn't answer. And these days, she had been avoiding too much contact with Li Nanheng. Even if everyone knew that there was a relationship between her and Li Nanheng, she didn't want to be so obvious and direct. After all, they used to be brothers, and she always felt particularly uncomfortable under everyone's eyes. The two of them took a walk for a while, and were about to go back, when suddenly, she noticed that there seemed to be something on the other side of the river. To ensure Jinwan's safety, Feng Ling left Jinwan on this side of the river, where the brothers of the base were stationed, and went to the other side to check the situation. Because just now, someone in the grass on the other side shone a flashlight on Feng Ling obviously. They only saw Feng Ling from this angle, and shouldn't see Jinwan. She asked Jinwan to stay here, so that she could hide temporarily to avoid being hurt. However, there seemed to be a lot of people on the other side. After making sure that Jinwan was hiding in the grass here, Feng Ling went straight to the other side. Sure enough, there were people on the other side. As soon as she went over, Feng Ling's ears twitched, and she turned sharply to avoid the knife that was chopped at her in the dark. In the moonlight, she looked back and saw the cold light on the knife in the man's hand. She narrowed her eyes and dodged again, jumped up, and kicked the man's foot hard. There were not many people hiding in the grass on the other side of the river, and Feng Ling killed them in a few minutes. She didn't hear any sound from the other side, and thought that Jinwan was still hiding there quietly. After checking for a minute, she turned back. But when she returned to the grass where Jinwan had been hiding, she found that Jinwan had disappeared. Mrs. Mo. Feng Ling looked around and frowned. Jinwan. Her low voice was scattered in the wind, and the river of Tunnel Sap Lake in the distance was calm and dark. No one responded. There was only a cell phone left in the grass, lying there quietly. Feng Ling searched all the way back to the camp. After asking, she confirmed that Jinwan had not come back, so she said in a low voice, "Jinwan has been caught." As soon as she finished speaking, the brothers who had just eaten stood up in an instant, and their faces turned cold like Feng Ling's. The camp was surrounded by more serious guards, and someone quickly informed Li Nanheng to prepare a rescue plan. If Mr. Mo was trapped inside, they didn't need to worry for the time being. After all, Mr. Mo had a bargaining chip in his hand, and those people didn't dare to do anything to him. With Mr. Mo's means, he would definitely be able to safely delay enough time to rescue them. But Jinwan was different. More importantly, Jinwan was pregnant. If anything happened to her, everyone here would feel ashamed to face Mr. Mo. Hearing the news, Li Nanheng came out and asked, "What happened?" Chapter 1158. Feng Ling stood still and frowned. There were people on the other side of the river just now. I went over to check. Jinwan shouldn't have made any noise to attract the enemy's attention. There seems to be only one possibility. That is, those people had already arranged people around, and were ready to attack at any time. But they accidentally took Jinwan away. "Boss, what should we do now?" Kay was also very clear about Mrs. Mo's situation. Fearing that something bad would happen, he stood up with a gun in his arms. "We have to rescue her as soon as possible." After a moment of silence, Li Nanheng said lightly, "Arrange some men to guard all the exits of the jungle. Their people only dare to lurk in the dark, and dare not make any sound to attract our attention. Although Jinwan is useless in terms of force, she is different from us. She is not from 11 base. If she is smart enough, she will know how to stall for time to protect herself. There won't be any problem for the time being. Kay, come in with me." After giving instructions, Li Nanheng took a look at Feng Ling. "Wait here. Don't be impulsive. Don't rush in to rescue her alone." As if being seen through, Feng Ling looked at him. Li Nanheng gave her a warning look again, and then turned and walked in with a serious look. The next day, Feng Ling had changed into a tight-fitting black outfit, and hung 2 silencer guns on her waist. She was squatting down to tie her shoelaces, and at the same time, she placed the dagger that flashed with a cold light into the scabbard beside her boots. "What are you doing?" Just as she was about to tie her shoelaces and get up, suddenly, a black shadow appeared in front of her, and a pair of black leather boots stopped in front of her. She could tell it was Li Nanheng's voice without looking. Feng Ling didn't look up, fixed the dagger next to her boots, touched the gun at her waist, stood up, and looked blankly at the man in front of her. "Jinwan has been taken away for a day and a night. I have to go in to find her." If Li Nanheng hadn't warned her last night, she would have gone in last night. "Don't you know the situation around this jungle? If the mines here are as easy to clear as the mines in the Snake Valley, we don't have to stay here for so many days. This place is full of minefields left by the war decades ago, including the new minefields inside. Before you find her, you will be blown to pieces and wait for us to go in and collect your corpse. Feng Ling frowned. She was caught when she was with me. Whether it's from Mr. Mo's point of view, or from my point of view as her bodyguard, the responsibility is on me. Even if my body is smashed into pieces, I must bring her back safely. What I'm afraid of is that you won't be able to find her even if you die, Li Nanheng scolded. Mr. Mo has the secrets of the arms dealers in his hands. Those people have been afraid of the pressure Mr. Mo exerted on them, and don't dare to do anything to him. But Jean Wan is different. She doesn't know those people, and doesn't know how bloody and violent they are. It's normal for them to kill without batting an eye. She has a child in her belly, and knows how to protect herself. If you rush in now, it's like throwing an egg against a stone, Li Nanheng said. I know you are more anxious than anyone else, because of Jean Wan's accident. The two of you have been together for so long, and have developed a very good relationship. But Feng Ling, remember, you are a member of 11 Base. Have you forgotten the rules of the base? He didn't talk about the relationship between him and her, but only the rules of the base. Feng Ling looked at him coldly and didn't speak. Don't be impulsive. That's the first rule. As soon as Li Nanheng said this, he suddenly kicked her calf unexpectedly. When Feng Ling was about to dodge, he reached out to grab the 2 guns from her waist, turned them around in his hand, and then put the guns into his own waist. You! Feng Ling glared at him. Stay here and wait. If it weren't for the minefields in this jungle, I would have gone in long ago. You don't need to be so anxious here, Li Nanheng said expressionlessly. The domestic border rescue team, and the SWAT team in the United States, will soon send a large number of helicopters over. Wait patiently, okay? We also have a helicopter. I can drive it in myself. Feng Ling frowned. Although she didn't specially learn to fly a helicopter in the base, every member would have basic training, so basically everyone knew how to fly a helicopter. It just depended on which team was more skilled. Bullshit. Seeing her fearless look, Li Nanheng scolded. These people have been fighting against our base for so many years and haven't been wiped out. Now they have the ability to ambush Mo Jingshan, which is enough to show that they have set up layers of ambushes here, just waiting for our base to come in. If you fly in now, before you can parachute in to save him, you will be shot down by the people below. You have been on so many missions. You have always been calm and cautious, but this time, you can't calm down. Feng Ling clenched her fists, thinking of the way Jean Wan usually got along with her like a sister, and then of the scene when Jean Wan obediently squatted in the grass yesterday. She couldn't imagine what Jean Wan was going through now, but she was really uneasy and worried. If you can't calm down, go back to High City and wait for the news. We don't need you here. Seeing her expression, Li Nanheng scolded her again and confiscated her guns. Obviously, if she still wanted to continue to be impulsive, he would ignore her and turn to leave. Feng Ling looked at his back, and then at the 2 guns on his waist. She secretly clenched her fists, and abruptly took a step forward, reaching out to snatch the guns back. However, at the moment when she rushed over, Li Nanheng pressed her hand on his shoulder, and threw her over his shoulder. When she needed to vent her emotions, he couldn't be too lenient with her. Otherwise, she would have nowhere to vent her uneasiness and irritation. Seeing that she kept attacking with a cold face to take back the guns, Li Nanheng raised his hand to block and only defended. In the end, he clasped her wrist and suddenly pulled the woman who was full of worry into his arms, buckling her in his arms. Seeing this, Feng Ling began to struggle in his arms, but he looked down at her white neck. All the marks on it had now disappeared, and it was as clean as white jade, covered with a thin layer of sweat because of the struggle. Seeing that she was still struggling, Li Nanheng lowered his head and bit her hard on the neck. Let me go. Feng Ling trembled in pain, and because of this pain, she managed to calm down a little and cried hoarsely. Chapter 1159. However, her slightly hoarse voice was hoarse to the man's bones. He tightened his grip and bit her neck even more fiercely. It was as if the marks from before had disappeared just like that. He was more or less indignant and wanted to leave something on her body. After not touching her for a few days, he seemed to be addicted to it. He couldn't wait for her menstrual period to end so that he could carry her into the grass and have sex with her on the spot. Hearing the sound here, Kay and Lin Cheng thought something was wrong, so they walked over to take a look, only to see this scene in an instant. Shit! The two of them decisively covered their eyes with their hands, and then peeked out a little to look over there. The corner of Kay's mouth twitched. What was going on? What was going on between Boss and Feng Ling? In the past, they had been hiding it in the base. Even if they really wanted to fall in love, they wouldn't be so blatant. Was Boss going to directly announce to the world that Feng Ling was his woman? Seeing someone coming over, Feng Ling suddenly stepped on Li Nanheng's leg, bent her leg back, and kicked at his leg bone. Li Nanheng released her in time and dodged to the side to avoid her attack. Feng Ling raised her hand and rubbed it hard on her neck, glared at him, and then turned to look at Kay and Lin Cheng. What are you standing there for? Kay coughed, saw the bite mark on Feng Ling's neck, and bitterly pulled the man next to him to leave. But Feng Ling subconsciously said, "A snake came over just now and I was bitten. Boss just came to help me take the drug, so it's not what you saw." As soon as she finished her explanation, Feng Ling almost bit her own tongue. Even she couldn't believe her own explanation. As soon as she explained, Kay and Lin Cheng ran away even faster. Seeing them running fast, Feng Ling turned to look at Li Nanheng with a cold face. But the man was standing not far from her, with one hand in his trouser pocket, and the other playing with the gun he had taken from her. He raised his eyebrows at her. Feng Ling closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and abruptly reached out her hand. "Give the gun back to me." Li Nanheng snorted and did not answer. Instead, he said, "Speaking of being bitten by a snake, you were indeed bitten by a poisonous snake when you were on a mission. Do you still remember how I sucked the poison out of you?" Feng Ling kept a straight face and did not speak. If it weren't for that incident, he wouldn't have found out that she was a woman disguised as a man. Or perhaps, even if he had discovered it long ago, he wouldn't have been exposed so quickly. At the very least, she could stay in the base for a few more years and live in peace. She gave up on the gun in his hand, turned around and walked away. She then pulled out the dagger by her feet and threw it behind her. The dagger stabbed deep into the ground, and she left quickly with no expression on her face. Nanheng glanced at the dagger that had been accurately inserted into the ground by his feet and chuckled. He bent down to pick up the dagger and walked over. Because no one knew what had happened to Jinwan, Feng Ling was in a particularly bad mood these 2 days. She was so angry that no one dared to provoke her. After all, Mr. Mo was missing, and they could calmly consider a careful rescue plan. They believed that with Mr. Mo's wisdom and ability, he would be fine, but they really couldn't guarantee Jinwan's safety. Even if she could save her life, she was carrying a child in her belly. Even if both of them were rescued in the end, if Jinwan's child couldn't be saved in this turbulence, everyone would definitely feel guilty, especially Feng Ling. After all, she was responsible for protecting Jinwan. But this time, not only did she not stay in High City to protect Jinwan, but she also took Jinwan to Cambodia. Now Jinwan's life was hanging in the balance. Now anyone who mentioned Jinwan's name in front of Feng Ling could see the obvious worry on her face. Even if she didn't mention Jinwan's name, she was even less talkative now. She often didn't even eat, but just sat in front of the temporary public computer in the camp and kept checking the new minefield map around. It was not difficult to see that she was seizing every opportunity to go in to find Jinwan. She was so anxious that she couldn't stay calm. Besides, Li Nanheng had just offended her, so it was impossible for her to listen to him. Seeing Feng Ling sitting in front of the computer again, Li Nanheng glanced at the twinkling stars in the sky, and then glanced at Kay, who had just returned from the patrol area with a sniper rifle in his arms, and was about to have dinner. When Kay passed by him, he said, "Kay, I have a task for you." Suddenly hearing Boss Li's cold voice, Kay suddenly stopped and turned to look at Li Nanheng. "Ah, find a way to get Feng Ling drunk." "Ah," another word full of doubt. But this time he was obviously more confused than when Bosley suddenly spoke to him. Don't get too drunk. Let her forget about Jinwan for a while. Don't be so nervous. The rescue team will arrive before noon tomorrow. Before that, no one is allowed to act rashly. Obviously, she won't listen to orders rationally, and she hasn't slept for 2 days. In her current condition, she won't be able to concentrate on the battle tomorrow, and will make mistakes. Li Nanheng said lightly, glancing over Kei's shoulder, as if inadvertently glancing at Feng Ling, who was concentrating on checking the map of the minefield. The rescue team will arrive before noon tomorrow. Before that, no one is allowed to act rashly. Kei, boss, your words are too dignified. You want Feng Ling to go to sleep now, but you don't dare to coax her, so just say it. You want to get her drunk? But then again, Feng Ling had been very nervous since Jinwan was taken away. It could be seen that she was really worried about Jinwan, and really blamed herself. When she was in the base, no matter how dangerous the mission was, no matter how desperate the situation was, she had never been so nervous. It had been 2 days. He really should find a way to calm her down. And the best way was to let her drink some wine. But now was there a suitable reason to let her drink wine? Bosley threw a difficult problem to him. TSK, how despicable. I can find a way to get her drunk, but boss, where is the wine? Kei said, we came to Cambodia for a mission. At such a serious time. Who dares to take the wine out of the base? Isn't he tired of living? Where can I get the wine? 4M. Chapter 1160. Li Nanheng glanced at the smallest bulletproof shed next to the camp, and said in a voice that only Kei could hear. When Tam went to the nearby village to exchange for ingredients at night, he bought 2 jars of wine brewed by a local farmer. Kei looked at the things that looked like wine jars. No wonder he suddenly asked him to get Feng Ling drunk. It seemed that boss already had this plan. He actually allowed Tam to exchange for wine. That was to say, now they only needed one person who could compete with Feng Ling in the drinking competition. This person seemed to be him. But Kei clearly remembered that boss and Feng Ling were still kissing in the jungle. Why don't you go drink with her yourself? Li Nanheng glanced at him coldly. Did she look at me directly today? Of course not. But everyone was busy and didn't want to eat boss and Feng Ling's dog food. So they didn't deliberately observe the situation between the two of them. But thinking about it carefully, it seemed that except for the ambiguous scene in the jungle, Feng Ling and boss were with other brothers, and didn't have any contact with each other. Kei wanted to ask more, but Li Nanheng had already given him a warning look. Go! Feng Ling read all the information about the distribution of the minefield, and all the other rescue preparations on the computer, and had a general idea of everything around the jungle in her heart. Although she wouldn't act impulsively, she really couldn't sit still, and the police reinforcements from the United States didn't come, which made her angry. But no matter what, even if she had accumulated a lot of dissatisfaction, she couldn't vent it. She did want to go out to explore the way at night when no one was paying attention, but she knew that if she acted rashly, she might only cause trouble for everyone. So she had been sitting here, thinking about how to save Jinwan and killing time in this way. Otherwise, she always felt that Jinwan was being tortured now, and her heart was being roasted on a fire. All right, don't stay here alone. Suddenly, Kei came over with 2 bowls and put them in front of her. Feng Ling looked away from the computer screen and at the bowls that Kei put there. These bowls were borrowed from a nearby farm a few days ago. Although they looked very simple, they were very clean. These bowls had been used for meals these days. Kei poured wine into the 2 bowls. I heard boss say that no matter how much the American police delay, they will arrive at noon tomorrow at the latest. If they still don't arrive, we will go in and save them. Don't worry. There are still more than 10 hours before noon tomorrow. If they still don't arrive, we will go in and save them ourselves. Don't worry. There are still more than 10 hours before noon tomorrow. If something really happens to Mrs. M.O., it should have happened yesterday. If she can survive until now without any danger, I believe that she, like Mr. M.O., has the wisdom of survival of the fittest. She will find a way to protect herself. Don't be so restless. Feng Ling didn't speak for a while, and just looked at the wine in the bowl. After a moment of silence, she asked, "Where did you get the wine?" In the afternoon, Tam and the others got drunk. When they went to the nearby farm to exchange things, they got 2 jars of wine. But Tam and Lei Peng were unlucky. They planned to secretly drink some at night, but they had to take the temporary patrol shift tonight. Since they had something to do, they couldn't drink a drop of wine. "I have nothing to do tonight, so I got the wine," Kay said as he picked up a bowl and took a sip, and then sighed with satisfaction. "Yes, this is the wine brewed by the local farmers. It's much better than those bought outside. And I heard that this kind of wine is not easy to get drunk. It's just to satisfy your craving. Do you want to try it? I don't have a preference for wine, and I can't hold my liquor well. I don't need it to satisfy my craving. If you want to drink, drink it yourself." Feng Ling didn't touch the wine. Gee, this wouldn't do. The task that boss temporarily arranged for him at night was still on his shoulders. "Try it first. It's really delicious," Kay said as he picked up the bowl and put it to her mouth. "If you can't drink it, drink a little. Even if you don't get drunk, you can at least have a good sleep." Feng Ling didn't take it but said, "I'm fine. I can't sleep even if I don't drink it." "You can't be so tense all the time. You have to lie down and rest." "I'm fine." Seeing this method didn't work, Kay thought for a while and suddenly lowered his head to whisper in her ear, "What on earth happened between you and Bosley?" "Feng Ling." As he spoke, Kay looked down at Feng Ling's neck, where there was a faint bite mark. "Today, Lin Chung and I saw you and Boss." Before he finished speaking, Feng Ling suddenly took the bowl in his hand and lowered her head to take a sip. She just didn't know how to answer, and she didn't want to talk about Li Nanheng. However, she didn't know how to say too much, and deliberately changing the topic was too stiff, so she might as well drink to shut her mouth. As soon as she mentioned Li Nanheng, she suddenly drank it. Originally, Kay wanted to talk about love with her in depth, and see if he could move her to drink a few mouthfuls of wine. But he never expected that as soon as he mentioned Bosley, she would drink it directly. His heart was also itching. Originally, his purpose was to get her drunk, but now he was really curious about what was going on between her and Boss, and more importantly, to what stage it had developed. However, Feng Ling was probably affected by the spiciness of the wine. After taking 2 sips, she endured the burning sensation in her throat and did not want to speak. She lowered her head and frowned as though she was drinking some medicine. She took a few more sips. Seeing that she just drank and didn't speak, Kay leaned close to her and asked, "Hey, don't think this can end the topic. Feng Ling, we've known each other for so many years. It was a coincidence that I brought you into the base. If there really is something between you and Boss, I can be regarded as half a matchmaker, right? You can't hide it from me." Feng Ling. She moved the bowl away from her mouth a little, still looking at the remaining wine in the bowl, endured the burning sensation in her throat, and asked in a low voice, "There's nothing to hide. What do you want to ask?" 4M. Chapter 1161. Kay immediately beamed with joy. "Nothing. I just want to ask you, how far have you developed with Boss? Have you?" He raised his 2 hands and hooked his thumbs together. Feng Ling understood. He was not just asking for a kiss, but a deeper question. She coughed lightly, looked at his gesture, and then looked down at the bowl in front of her. She didn't know how to answer. "Forget it, let's drink." Seeing that she suddenly lowered her head and continued to drink without saying a word, the little woman was slightly embarrassed and didn't know how to answer. Her attitude was clear. Needless to say, their little Feng Ling had most likely been eaten by that wolf Boss, without any bones left. TSK. If he had known that she was a woman, alas, what was the use of knowing? If he had known it earlier, he would have been crushed by Bosley like Xiao Fei, and wouldn't have had a chance to get her. Whether he knew it earlier or later, the result was the same. They were just brothers. Kay sighed again. He sighed that he was saved by a 13-year-old girl in the jungle. The point was that this little girl was so handsome that he was won over. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken the initiative to bring her back to the base. But speaking of which, If Boss Lee and Feng Ling really got together in the future, no matter what, he had to let Boss Lee have a good drink with him. At night, many brothers had returned to their small rooms to rest for the time being. But in case of emergencies, most of them slept in their clothes. The wood under the fires in front of the camp crackled and popped. Kay's alcohol tolerance was very good, and he was a little dizzy. He watched Feng Ling drink 2 large bowls of wine. Li Nanheng walked out of the tent inside, and happened to run into Kay, who was looking for a place to relieve himself. Kay opened his eyes in a daze and saw it was Boss. He immediately whispered as if reporting, "Boss, Feng Ling has been drinking a lot these years, hasn't she? Her alcohol tolerance seems to be much better than when she was in the base." Li Nanheng glanced at him. "Yes, she's much better, but she's still very weak." "How much did she drink?" Kay raised his hand and gestured 2 big bowls. "Not too much, not too little, just 2 full bowls." If a man with average alcohol tolerance drank 2 full bowls of this kind of wine, he should be drunk by now. But she has been sitting there. Her face is not red, and she is not out of breath. When she talked to me, she was still very sober and not drunk at all. In order to drink with her, I drank the whole jar. Now she doesn't seem to be drunk, boss. Well, I'm going to relieve myself, and then I'll come back and continue to drink with her. Not drunk yet. Yeah, he's not drunk yet. He's still sitting there waiting for me to go back, Kay said as he staggered back in a daze and pointed to Feng Ling and the public laptop placed outside. Look at her. She hasn't moved at all. Li Nanheng didn't respond and walked over. Seeing that Boss had gone over, Kay didn't continue to be long-winded, lest he talked too much with Boss here and arouse Feng Ling's suspicion. He hurriedly turned to the dense forest to find a place to relieve himself. Feng Ling was still sitting in front of the computer, and there was an empty bowl by her hand. Li Nanheng walked over and lowered his eyes to look at her. He saw that although she was sitting upright and staring at the computer screen, the standby power on the computer was running out. The power bar was flashing with a red light of 2%. She continued to stare at the computer screen as if nothing had happened. He approached, but she didn't seem to notice, and was still staring at the screen. Li Nanheng's intuition told him something was wrong. He walked around her and looked at her again, only to see that her fingers seemed to be typing on the keyboard, but there was no page on the screen. She was typing in the air, which was obviously a little mechanical. Li Nanheng immediately understood something. He lowered his eyes to look at the little woman with a pair of round eyes, leaned down, and sat next to her. Feng Ling, N. The woman in front of the computer responded. Her voice sounded like when she was chatting with Kay, not as harsh and cold as when she faced him during the day. Hearing her tone, Li Nanheng knew what was going on. He moved his chair closer to her and sat shoulder to shoulder with her. At the same time, he reached out to take the laptop on the small table in front of her, closed it, and put it aside. The computer beside Feng Ling's hand was gone. As if she didn't know what to do, she just sat there and turned to look at him in confusion. Looking at her blank eyes, Li Nanheng wanted to laugh, but he didn't laugh out loud. He just looked at her. How much did you drink? Feng Ling was stunned but obediently answered, 2 bowls. Is it delicious? And it's delicious, Feng Ling answered seriously, and then suddenly thought for a moment and said, it's just a little spicy. It was rare to see Feng Ling sitting so obediently by the side and speaking so kindly. Li Nanheng found that he really liked her when she was drunk. For example, last time because she drank too much, she pretended to be a man in the hotel, took off her pants and dug around in her pants. She was as cute as she could be. He glanced at her hand on her lap, reached out to hold her hand gently, held it in his palm, and rubbed it gently and lovingly. After rubbing for a while, he felt that she had shown this obedient side in front of Kay just now. She was so calm and gentle now. Did she think he was Kay? The man's good mood suddenly turned gloomy. He suddenly held her hand and asked, Are you drunk? No. Very good. People who drank too much would never admit that they were drunk. Who am I? He asked directly. Feng Ling looked straight at him. Li Nanheng. Seeing that she recognized him and knew who was sitting next to her and holding her hand, The gloomy haze on the man's face was swept away by the sunshine again. He held her hand tightly again. Seeing her obedient look, he whispered in her ear. At this time, all kinds of tropical insects and ants are moving around outside. And there are a lot of mosquitoes. Come in with me to sleep, okay? All right. Seeing that she was obedient, Li Nanheng took her little hand, stood up and walked back. Kay came back from a distance and saw them, so he immediately slipped away. Was Feng Ling drunk too much? Did she drink too much? Did she drink too much? 4M. Chapter 1162. When Li Nanheng pulled Feng Ling back, he saw that the little woman didn't seem to be swaying when she walked, and was no different from when she was sober. If she hadn't been particularly obedient, he would have suspected that she was not drunk at all. But with her temper, she would never agree to hold hands with him in public in the camp when she was sober, let alone be so calm to him, after being provoked by him a few days ago. Before walking into the compartment in the tent, Li Nanheng held her little hand and asked as he walked, Feng Ling, let me ask you a question. Yes. Do you like me? Yes. The expression on the man's face was a bit excited, and he was in a good mood. He held back his laughter, continued to pull her in, and continued to ask, How much do you like me? I like you very much. Have you ever had such feelings for other men? No. Since you like me, why do you always hide from me? Can't you be nice to me? Because you are not a good thing. Li Nanheng turned to look at her with a jerk. If it weren't for the fact that Feng Ling was still walking with him obediently, he would have suspected that she was not drunk at all. Seeing that her eyes were still a bit dazed, Li Nanheng resisted the urge to knock her head and asked, Why am I not a good thing? Do I not love you enough, or do I not love you enough? Because of his sudden question, Feng Ling stopped in her tracks. She turned her eyes and looked at him seriously. Seeing that although her eyes were dazed, they were especially serious, Li Nanheng felt a bit guilty after being stared at by her for a while. So he simply continued to walk forward. Feng Ling also followed him. However, when they arrived at the door of her room, Li Nanheng was about to push the door open when Feng Ling suddenly said, Boss, your room is over there. Li Nanheng turned to look at her. She was already so drunk, but she still knew where his room was? Well, I'll send you in. I'll sit here for a while and then leave, he answered seriously. Feng Ling looked at him doubtfully, but it was clear that although she still had a doubtful expression, she had temporarily lost the ability to think. She just looked at him, as though she was not sure if she should let him in. Li Nanheng was about to push the door open when Feng Ling said, Boss, you can't go in. Why can't I go in? Li Nanheng raised his brows and turned to look at her. Feng Ling also answered seriously, You just can't go in. You have to give me a reason. Feng Ling watched him for a long time before saying seriously, If you enter my room, I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself. Can't control it? These words made Li Nanheng decisively turn the knob on her door and push the door open. There was a faint smile in his eyes, but his expression remained calm and serious. What do you mean you can't control it? That's right. Feng Ling stared at his hand that had already pushed the door open, and her expression suddenly became conflicted. Then Li Nanheng pushed the door open and entered. She stood there for a moment before following him in. Earlier, she had said that she didn't want him to come in, but after she followed him in, she seemed to subconsciously close the door behind her. Seeing her habitual action, Li Nanheng glanced at her without batting an eyelid, stood in front of her, and said with an extremely pure expression and a very calm voice, Feng Ling. Feng Ling raised her head to look at the man because he was standing very close to her, and because of his height. The man bent down to whisper in front of her face, What did you say just now? Can't control myself? She didn't speak, but just looked at him. Seeing that she didn't move, the man didn't know whether she was embarrassed to say it, or her mind was stuck. He felt that he had to cherish this moment, and couldn't let her be stuck like this. He simply raised his hand, and stretched out 2 fingers in front of her. How many is this? Feng Ling blinked blankly. 2. Just when Li Nanheng was about to say that she looked normal, the short-haired little woman in front of him suddenly took a step forward, approached him, and abruptly bit the 2 fingers he raised. Li Nanheng. It didn't hurt. She clearly didn't want to bite hard, but when she suddenly bit down lightly, the tip of her tongue inevitably brushed against her fingertips, which made his heart itch unbearably. Li Nanheng didn't pull his fingers out. He just watched her biting his fingers and his voice became lower. Are you so drunk? I'm not drunk, she insisted. And I'm not drunk. The man wanted to laugh but didn't. Feng Ling's alcohol tolerance was indeed not ordinary. It seemed that even if he let her drink in the future, she could only drink in places where he was present. He definitely couldn't let others see her like this. After drinking too much, she didn't act crazy or rush to sleep. She just seemed to be in a state where her consciousness seemed to be outside the sky. She looked normal, but her normal consciousness had flown to nowhere. It was really too cute. He really couldn't let others see her like this. Otherwise, his little wife might not be able to hold it in. He couldn't let her bite his fingers anymore. Seeing her biting him with blurred eyes, the man felt the obvious change in his lower body. But after all, this was not a suitable place. Firstly, the sound insulation was not good. Secondly, right now Jin Wan and Imo Jingshan's situation was not clear, and he couldn't concentrate on doing those things at this time. Furthermore, her period should not be over yet, so he still had to endure it. Li Nanheng suddenly put down his hand. Feng Ling's mouth was empty, but she didn't react much. She just looked at him with some regret, as he instinctively took a step back. She blinked and then said as if she had been wronged. Boss Li, am I particularly fierce? At least he knew his place. Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows. No, you're not fierce. You're particularly cute. Feng Ling looked confused. How am I cute? In the end, Li Nanheng couldn't help but raise his hand and pinch her cheek. You're always cute. Except for you. I'm 80% sure I'll never look at any other woman in this life. Feng Ling looked at him blankly. Oh, a what? The man then glanced around her room. There was no bathroom like the one in the hotel. If she wanted to pretend to be a man and go to the bathroom while standing, he probably wouldn't be able to fulfill her wish. However, just as the man was curious about what she would do after drinking too much this time, the woman in front of him suddenly stepped forward half an inch and directly pressed into his arms. The moment the man lowered his head to look at her, she suddenly tiptoed and pressed a kiss on his lips. Li Nanheng didn't move. His nose was filled with the woman's wine fragrance. At first, there was a moment of surprise in his eyes, but he concealed it perfectly. He only looked at the woman, who suddenly took the initiative to kiss him. Chapter 1163. Very soft. Very hot. Very tempted. The kiss was over. Or rather, Feng Ling only pressed a kiss on his lips. After a while, she moved away and stepped back a little. The man resisted the urge to pull her back into his arms. As though he was afraid of scaring her, he lowered his eyes and said softly, Is this what you mean by you can't control yourself? Feng Ling blinked again, and then nodded seriously. En. The man could no longer hide the smile on his face. You like me very much, En? Feng Ling answered honestly. En. This time, she even nodded, as though giving a very accurate affirmation. Then don't control yourself. The man curved his lips. Feng Ling looked at him for a while, and suddenly raised her hand to cover her eyes shyly. She abruptly turned her back. No, I'm shy. Li Nanheng looked at Feng Ling, who was suddenly so shy. Why are you shy? Your man is right in front of you. Besides, you've even slept with him. It's not like we're talking about feelings between children. Just say what you want to say, and do what you want to do. Show me your courage to go into battle. The man poked her slender shoulder, and began to patiently guide her. Feng Ling seemed to believe his words. She put down her hand that was covering her eyes, and hesitantly turned to look at him. Seeing that she had turned around, the man sat on the only bed in her small room that occupied a relatively large space. He casually stretched out his long legs and raised his arms to the sides. He gave her a look. Come, do what you want to do. However, Feng Ling stood there and did not move for a long time. Li Nanheng raised his brows and continued to spread his arms. Not coming. At this time, Feng Ling suddenly raised her hand, gently scratched her chin, and then raised her hand to gently scratch the place under her ear connected to her neck. At this time, Li Nanheng remembered that they were used to taking a bath every day. But in this temporary camp, even if there was sufficient water, Feng Ling could not casually go to the tunnel sap lake to take a bath. There were no convenient facilities for taking a bath here. For the past 2 days, she had been wiping herself in the room with the door closed before going to bed. She hadn't wiped herself today, and had been pestered by Kay to drink outside. This place was too stuffy, and there was no air conditioning in the small room. There was only a fan that could temporarily cool her down, but at this moment, the fan was not turned on. She must be a little uncomfortable because of the heat. Although he still wanted to guide her patiently, he couldn't just watch her sleep like this after drinking too much. He was afraid that she wouldn't be able to sleep comfortably. Li Nanheng sighed and patted the bed beside him. "Come here and sit down." Feng Ling looked at him for a while, walked over, and sat down obediently. Li Nanheng got up and went out, spent a few minutes to get water, and then found the towel she used in her room. He washed it, wrung it out, and came back. He wiped her face that was a little red, and then wiped her neck that she had just scratched, helping her to wipe away the sweat around her neck. Then he leaned down to look at her, raised a finger, and gently hooked her chin, a little flirting, and a little wanting her to continue her uncontrollable actions just now. "Do you feel better?" Feng Ling nodded, sat there comfortably, and closed her eyes, waiting for him to continue wiping for her. Li Nanheng. She really didn't know how hard it was for a man to sit here like this, and let him do whatever he wanted. No matter what he did, she wouldn't resist. He took her hand, and wiped her exposed arms and hands. Then he tugged down the collar of her wide t-shirt. He saw that she was wearing a tight black camisole, and didn't expose too much of her body. The man resisted the urge to take off her t-shirt, and patiently wiped her collarbone and shoulders. He watched her as he wiped. At this moment, Feng Ling had already opened her eyes again, but not completely. She was comfortably narrowing her eyes to look at him. After wiping all the parts that could be wiped, Li Nanheng felt that there was really no way to take off her pants. If he really took them off, he would be the crazy one. He could only do this. He threw the towel back into the basin and looked down at her. "Done. Do you want to sleep, or do you want to do something?" "I want to drink water." "Wait." Li Nanheng looked back at the table beside her bed. There was a kettle and a glass of water commonly used in the camp. He turned and walked over to pour a glass of water. To prevent dust from gathering in this kind of place, he simply rinsed the glass with water, poured more than half a glass, and handed the glass to her. "Drink it." Feng Ling took the water and drank it without saying thank you. After drinking a few mouthfuls, she obediently returned the empty glass to him. She was really too obedient. Although he couldn't do anything to her, Li Nanheng was really unwilling to let her go. He simply sat down next to her, raised his arm, and put it around the shoulders of the little woman who was rarely obedient. He looked at her and said with a smile, "Feng Ling, will you do whatever I ask you to do now?" Feng Ling seemed to be stunned for a moment, and seemed to be analyzing the meaning of his words. After a few seconds she said, "Then I'll ask you something. Answer me seriously." "All right." Li Nanheng. "After that night at Rogers Pass, why didn't you tell me for so long?" Feng Ling. "I'm a little flustered. I don't know how to tell you." "A little flustered?" He thought she was so cold-hearted that she didn't need him to take responsibility. It was clearly her first time, and a few days ago, she said that it didn't matter to him, that she had slept with him. So it turned out that she was flustered and afraid, but she just hid it in this cold and hard shell, and refused to say it out. Li Nanheng smiled and patted her shoulder, and then looked at her sideways. "If someone else dared to treat you like that, what would you do?" Feng Ling did not hesitate and looked straight at him. "Except for you, no one else has a chance to treat me like that." Li Nanheng. "Am I a very special one in your heart?" Feng Ling. "Yes." Li Nanheng's smile almost reached his ears, but he still looked serious, feeling that it was too shameless of him to ask her what was on her mind. He'd better ask something normal. "Why don't you want to go back to the base?" he asked. Chapter 1164. Even if boss has helped me regain the face I once lost, I don't want to break so many rules. Even if there are many people who welcome me back, there are still different voices. I don't want to affect the balance of the entire base because of me. I also don't want Boss Lee to be pressured and threatened by the outside world because of me. I'm fine outside. Returning to the base is not my only choice. Li Nanheng nodded. Boss Lee, you're right. Indeed. When she was kicked out of the base 3 years ago, perhaps the base was the only thing she could rely on. But she was not the kind of person who was so weak and helpless that she couldn't open up a new life. In the past few years, she had been living a good life outside. She was free and there was nothing bad about it. The documents in the base were also there. If one day she was tired outside and wanted to go back, she could go back at any time. Or like now, if there was anything she could do, she would fight side by side with the brothers in the base. There was not much difference from before. The only difference was that she was freer than before. Her choice was understandable and very rational. Li Nanheng asked again. When did you know that you were related to the Feng family? This time, Feng Ling paused for a moment before answering. Because of the piece of jade that I always wore on my body when I was young. One time I found it. I only vaguely felt some connection, but I didn't want to investigate the truth. I don't really care about this. It could be seen that she really didn't care. If you are really the daughter of the Feng family, do you want to go back? No. Li Nanheng. Because what? Feng Ling. I don't like Feng Mingzhu. His answer was really straightforward. It would have been better if he had said this earlier. Why did he have to be so cold and awkward as usual? Li Nanheng smiled and raised his hand to rub her soft hair. It's up to you whether you want to go back or not. No one will force you. As for Feng Mingzhu, you don't have to worry too much. With me around, she can't cause any trouble. No matter where she is, you have me to support you in? Feng Ling blinked and suddenly imitated him to rub her hair. She raised her hand and touched his head a few times. Li Nanheng. Although he still wanted to ask some serious questions, he couldn't help but ask the first one. You didn't let me in just now. Were you afraid that you couldn't control something? Feng Ling didn't answer for a while, but looked at him with a burning gaze. Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows. Then I'll allow you to sleep. She was probably really sleepy. She stared at his eyes for a while and said, I'm afraid that I like you too much and can't control myself. Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows. Then like it. No one will stop you. Feng Ling. I still want to kiss you. Li Nanheng continued to raise his eyebrows higher and higher. Then kiss me. I can't ask for more. Feng Ling. I still want to bring you back to the wolf's den and let you sleep by my side. Li Nanheng wanted to laugh, but he suddenly lowered his eyebrows and smiled as he held Feng Ling in his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her on the forehead. As expected of a little wolf girl raised by wolves, she had been influenced too much before she was 5 years old. She subconsciously wanted to bring the things she liked back to the den and make them her own. However, she clearly didn't dare to do so. She was extremely timid. What else do you want? The man hugged her and lowered his head to look into her eyes. As he kissed her lips, his voice changed. He asked hoarsely, Do you want it? This so-called want was indeed what it meant. He already wanted to kiss her and bring her back to the wolf's den. He might as well ask directly. Feng Ling didn't hesitate. She allowed him to hold her and looked at him with incomparable sincerity. Yes. The man's eyes instantly deepened. His voice also became hoarse. He pressed his lips against hers and said, What do you want? I want you. Although it was indeed the answer he wanted to hear, Li Nanheng suddenly felt a little regretful when she suddenly said it in this kind of atmosphere. He tightly held the woman in his arms, who was still on her menstrual cycle, and in this small room, with poor soundproofing in the camp. He buried his face in her neck and kissed her again and again. He asked about the faint and fresh scent on her body again and again, but he could not resolve this terrible desire that could kill him. He kissed a shallow hickey on her neck and then hugged her. He almost pressed her into his body and said in an unusually hoarse voice, Little Feng Ling, you really want my life? He knew that if they continued to kiss and hug like this, he would really die on the spot from suffocation. but he couldn't bully her at this time. Moreover, even if she helped him with this broken place, he wouldn't be able to clean himself up now that he had to go out at the last minute. It wasn't a suitable place to do anything. Li Nanheng resisted the urge and put the little woman in his arms, who was as obedient as a cat on the bed. "All right, go to sleep." Just as he helped her tuck in the quilt and was about to get up, Feng Ling suddenly raised her hand and grabbed his hand. "Boss, sleep with me." Li Nanheng. He looked down at the state of his lower body. He really King felt that he had shot himself in the foot. Why did he make her so drunk and torture himself like this? There was still a hard battle to fight tomorrow. Who could bear being teased like this? "I'll go out first. I'll be back in a while. You sleep first." Li Nanheng just wanted to go out and find a place where there was no one to solve the problem by himself before coming back. However, Feng Ling held his hand and didn't let go. She didn't speak and just stared at him, as if she wouldn't say anything even if he really left now. But there would definitely be disappointment in her eyes. Li Nanheng looked at her for a while. A few minutes later, he was defeated and could only lie down. After all, Feng Ling, who was so obedient and willing to take off her underwear, was just a flash in the pan. When she sobered up, who knew how she would roll her eyes at him? He couldn't bear to do it, so he just endured it. However, as soon as he lay down, Feng Ling turned over on the bed and took the initiative to lean against his arms to hug him. At the same time, her eyes seemed to notice the obvious place on his lower body and immediately looked at him in surprise. Being stared at by her eyes, even if she really didn't react or do anything, Li Nanheng's temples instantly twitched, and the blue veins on his forehead popped out. He directly pulled the quilt over his body, but it was obvious that the thin summer quilt was useless and had no effect on covering him. Chapter 1165. It really couldn't be covered at all. Li Nanheng lay on the bed with a headache, panting heavily. He just wanted Feng Ling to fall asleep as soon as possible, so that he could go out and find a solution after she fell asleep. However, the little woman lying beside him rubbed her head against his chest, still staring at the obvious place under the quilt. "What are you looking at? Hurry up and go to sleep." The man's voice was hoarse, and he raised his hand to cover her eyes. "Go to sleep." Her vision was suddenly blocked. Feng Ling was stunned for a moment, and then she raised her hand to pull his hand down. "Boss, don't cover my eyes." "Then close your eyes." "Boss, what's wrong there?" Li Nanheng closed his eyes. At this moment, even the veins on the side of his neck were about to bulge. He forcefully pushed the little woman in his arms to the side, keeping her lying obediently by his side. "It's nothing. Be good. Go to sleep." After a moment of silence, Feng Ling finally didn't continue to speak, but she still lay on her side and looked at him. She no longer looked at his lower body, but she raised her eyes to stare at his face. Li Nanheng closed his eyes and ignored her, thinking that she had fallen asleep. Countless times in his heart, he wondered if there was anything that had a great impact on him. He wanted to find something to torture his mental state and take this opportunity to relieve the swelling pain down there. However, after thinking for a long time, what came to his mind was the scene that 3 years ago, Feng Ling was thrown in front of the base hall by a group of people, lying on the ground, scolded coldly by Mr. Li, and pointed at by everyone. All the things that belonged to her were thrown on the ground around her. She was in a sorry state, but secretly gritted her teeth and did not shed a single tear. In the end, she was driven out of the base in a sorry state. After thinking about it for a long time, the biggest blow to him in recent years turned out to be that Feng Ling was driven out of the base alone. What was the reason? He clearly had the ability to not let her suffer that kind of harm. He clearly could have rushed back to protect her in his arms, not letting anyone spy on her, and not letting anyone point at her. But he was not there at that time. The scenes in his mind not only did not divert Li Nanheng's attention, but his lower body did not show any signs of slowing down at all. It even made him want to hold the woman next to him tightly in his arms. He couldn't hold her. He had to endure it. Li Nanheng's eyes were still closed. Feng Ling lay by his side and did not close her eyes. She just looked at him and suddenly raised her hand. Her warm and soft fingers gently touched his lips. The man suddenly trembled and turned to look at her. His voice was so hoarse that he wondered if it was his own voice. "What are you doing?" Feng Ling abruptly sat up, searched her body for a while, and suddenly turned over to ride on him. Li Nanheng. He even looked at the little woman, who suddenly rode on him in horror. She said she was riding, but in fact she just stepped over it. Then, she stretched her arms and found the coat she was wearing on the simple table beside the bed. She rummaged through the coat pockets and took out a wallet. Then she took out 2 bank cards. Li Nanheng was about to collapse. He silently counted down in his heart. If she still didn't go down, no matter if it was her period or if the soundproofing here was good, he would never let her go. Just as he counted from 10 to 6 in his heart, Feng Ling got off him and lay back by his side. Suddenly, she raised the 2 bank cards in her hand to him. Li Nanheng, who had just finished counting in his heart, was still in a state of half disappointment and half relief. When he suddenly saw the card she handed to him, he didn't react. "What is this?" "Feng Ling. It's for you." "It's mine." Li Nanheng looked at the 2 cards. "Why did you give your card to me?" Feng Ling. "Boss, you've always been in charge of my card, and even took the time to help me manage my money. This is the money I've saved in the past 3 years. Boss, continue to help me manage it." Li Nanheng. Seeing that he didn't move, Feng Ling grabbed his hand on the quilt and stuffed the card into his hand. "Take it." Li Nanheng held the 2 cards and looked at the little woman lying beside him. Although she was drunk, her eyes were clear and serious. "Why did you give it to me?" She had lived outside for several years and had learned how to live and how to manage her own money, hadn't she? Feng Ling. "Because this is all I have." Li Nanheng. Feng Ling. "Take it. Don't lose it." With that, she stuffed the card in his hand into his palm and then whispered in his ear. "There are more than 200,000 yuan in it." It was probably her so-called all of her that had stimulated the man. Li Nanheng was speechless for a long time. As the heir of the Li family, the boss of 11 Base, and the leader of the underground arms trade in the United States, he had more than 10 billion yuan behind him. But at this moment, he felt that the bank card in his hand with more than 200,000 yuan was heavy, as if it was the most important thing. He carefully clenched it. He couldn't listen to her anymore. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to restrain himself. He closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep, wanting her to be obedient and quiet down. However, Feng Ling, who usually spoke very little and would only reply to others word by word, was suddenly so agitated that it made people anxious. "Boss, go to sleep." "Boss, sleep." "Boss, you." Li Nanheng couldn't bear it anymore. He suddenly turned over and pressed her under his body. His red eyes hid the man's excessive restraint and forbearance. "If you don't sleep now, even if you are on your period, I have 100 ways to make you unable to sleep. Shut up and sleep." Feng Ling. She stared at him blankly as if she understood something from his words, but also as if she didn't understand. Facing her eyes, Li Nanheng felt as if he was being fried in a pan of oil. He released her anxiously and was about to get up to leave. He really couldn't stay any longer. He had just propped up his arms on both sides of her body when suddenly, as if afraid that he would leave, Feng Ling raised her hands and wrapped them around his neck, pulling him down hard. Caught off guard, Li Nanheng fell back and hit her lips hard. More importantly, she took the initiative to raise her head and catch his kiss. She didn't know how to respond, but she still took the initiative to hold his neck and refused to let go. Li Nanheng did not move. He looked at the woman under him and saw that her eyes were wide open, as though she was half awake and half intoxicated, but her eyes reflected his face. It was him. Only him. Pitter-patter. The last string of reason in his mind was broken. For M. Chapter 1166. Li Nanheng went crazy and pulled her hand down. When Feng Ling's hand instinctively shrank back because of the heat, he gasped. "You provoked me. If you don't vent your anger, Don't even think about sleeping tonight. With that, the man leaned down and kissed her hard. This kiss, this urge that had been ruthlessly aroused, was uncontrollable. He didn't know if it was Feng Ling who gradually took the initiative to move his hand up and down, or if it was Li Nanheng who seduced her step by step and kissed her, teaching her how to make him more comfortable. When Feng Ling no longer needed his hand to hold her down, he had already held the woman tightly in his arms, hugging her, kissing her, and their lips and teeth were entangled. His mind was filled with thoughts. Just now his rationality had been completely depleted. If it wasn't for the fact that his hand had touched the cushion on her when he reached down and regained his rationality by a fraction of a second, he might have done anything now. Suddenly the man snorted, parted his lips and scolded hoarsely. "Why are you still biting me at this time?" In response to his dissatisfaction, Feng Ling's answer was that her hand didn't stop moving, but bit his chin again. Right now, Li Nanheng couldn't stand her seduction at all. He directly pulled her hand away, lowered his head, and bit her lips hard. As he kissed, his saliva tangled and unclear sounds came from their lips. Vaguely, she could only hear a few vague words. "I won't be able to get out of bed for 3 days and 3 nights when I go back. You vixen! Do you want to kill me?" Feng Ling woke up in an urgent whistle. When she woke up, she was still a little confused and didn't know where she was for a moment. When her vision became clear, and she saw that she was in her own compartment in the tent, she suddenly remembered and sat up. Because of the urgent whistle, she guessed that something big was going to happen, or there was an urgent matter that needed to be gathered. So she quickly got up to change clothes and went out. However, when she was about to get out of bed, she suddenly paused and looked down at her clothes. The loose t-shirt didn't seem to change, but why didn't she remember how she came back last night? At first, it was Kay who asked her out for a drink. Then what? She was about to reach for her phone to see what time it was. But the moment her hand touched the phone, she suddenly felt sore. Not to mention her hand, even her wrist was sore. That feeling was just like when she was in the base. Nanheng would drag her out to do devil training at night, and she would stand on the shooting range holding a gun all night. She felt that her 5 fingers were sore and stiff, and she couldn't move them anymore. She clenched her fists back and forth. She couldn't remember what had happened, but she seemed to have held a gun in her dream last night. There seemed to be something wrong with the gun's handle. It was terribly hot, but she still held it for a long time. If it was a dream, then why was her hand so sore? The urgent whistle sounded again and again. Without thinking too much, she picked up her cell phone and took a look at it. Then she pulled up the black uniform, quickly put it on, and rushed out. When she rushed out of the tent, she saw that many people were ready to go. She heard several acquaintances muttering as they ran outside. It seemed that there was a situation in the dense forest. In addition, the American police had arrived early. In order to get Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan out of danger in time, they immediately organized an emergency rescue team. But it was not early. The original plan was to go at noon, but it was almost 9 o'clock in the morning. She didn't expect that she would sleep so late. She must have drunk too much last night, but she didn't know if she was drunk in front of Kay, or if she was particularly embarrassing. At this time, Kay came over and stood in a row with her. After the sniper team drill master assigned them weapons, he threw a new sniper rifle to Feng Ling and gave her a look of approval. He believed that even if she hadn't returned to the team for training in the past few years, with all her previous achievements, she would definitely be able to snipe from a distance. Feng Ling held the gun steadily and nodded to the drill master. At the same time, she adjusted the angle of the gun in her hand and checked everywhere. After confirming that there were no bullets in the gun, she carried the gun on her back, retracted her hand, and subconsciously lowered her head to look at her hand. Why did her wrist and hand still feel sore? "Boss! Bossly! Bossly!" When Li Nanheng's figure appeared in everyone's sight, Feng Ling also turned her head to look at him, but her eyes were cold and emotionless. She glanced at the man's face lightly, then retracted her gaze, lowered her head with a straight face, and tightened the belt under her combat uniform. Li Nanheng seemed to inadvertently glance at Feng Ling standing in the crowd. Because she lowered her head to adjust her belt, she couldn't meet his eyes, but the man's gaze swept in her direction wantonly, and then he withdrew his gaze in time before others noticed anything fishy, and coldly ordered everyone to prepare to board the plane and go to rescue. Feng Ling also boarded the plane with everyone. They had been stationed here for several days, and now they suddenly ordered the team to go to the rescue, which meant that they must have made sufficient preparations. But the helicopter she boarded was the same one as Kay's, and Li Nanheng, the rescue team of the American police, and the commanding army were in the front. Separated by the plane, even if she could hear everyone's conversation through the headphones, she could also speak at this time, but she didn't open her mouth the whole time. She only listened to Li Nanheng's cold and serious voice, and did everything according to his instructions. After successfully flying into the center of the dense forest, everyone looked at a fixed electronic device in the cabin, on which various red dots showed the famous positions and the explosive range of the buried mines. Those were the points they needed to pay attention to, and then the position in the middle circled with bright yellow was the area where Akib and Dolly were currently active. After confirming the target range of the helicopters in front and the position of the helicopters behind, everyone only said into the headphones, "Roger." Feng Ling also said. Her voice was very soft, but on the plane in front, Li Nanheng, who was on the other end of the headphones, still heard her voice among the nearly 100 people. In the headphones, she still had a cold voice that kept people thousands of miles away, but it was very recognizable among the men's voices. 4M. Chapter 1167. Although Dolly and Akib were well prepared, and the artillery fire from below was frequent, since 11 Base could rush in at this time, they must have designed a flight route. They avoided all the attacks and landed smoothly. All the members got off the helicopter with guns and started a fierce battle in this dense forest. After fighting for a while, Feng Ling was suddenly dragged aside by Tam and winked at her. "Hurry up and find Mrs. Mo and Mr. Mo. We'll take care of them." Mr. Mo would be fine. What she was afraid of was Mrs. Mo. Feng Ling nodded and stopped fighting. She got on the helicopter behind and began to search around with 2 members of the American police. After searching for a long time, she remembered that Mr. Mo had agreed with 11 Base on the position signal, no matter when the rendezvous point would be in the west. She didn't know if Mrs. Mo had already met with Mr. Mo, so she asked the American police to drive the helicopter west. Sure enough, in a slightly safer area near the dense forest minefield in the west, she vaguely saw Jin Wan standing behind a tree. "Stop, land here!" Feng Ling shouted. When the helicopter landed smoothly, the police got off the helicopter first for fear of making any mistakes. Feng Ling also quickly got off the helicopter and went straight to Jin Wan. "Mrs. Mo." It sounded like Jin Wan was explaining her identity to the 2 American policemen. Feng Ling directly came forward to prove that she was on their side. The 2 policemen finally shut their mouths and did not continue interrogating Jin Wan. Feng Ling quickly stepped forward and grabbed Jin Wan's hand. "How are you?" "I'm sorry. We're late. We've been waiting for this batch of helicopters to rescue us. After all, the ambush here is very deep. If we don't make thorough preparations, we are likely to fail. But in the past 2 days, you must have suffered a lot." Before Feng Ling finished speaking, she looked at Jin Wan's pale face and bloody mouth, and knew that she must have experienced a thrilling experience before this. She lowered her head and saw the back of Jin Wan's hand. Her heart trembled. How could her hand be hurt like this? It was a burn. Without asking more questions, Feng Ling took Jin Wan back to the helicopter. After getting in and making sure it was safe, she asked, "How did your hand get hurt like this?" "There is a medicine box on the plane. I'll help you deal with it." "I'm fine." Jin Wan was taken into the helicopter. She finally relaxed a little, but not completely. She turned to look out of the cabin, in the direction that Mo Jingshan had just left, and asked, "Where is Mo Jingshan?" Before Feng Ling flew over, she had been observing the situation on the ground. She did see Mr. Mo passing by unscathed, and had already met up with the people in front. "Mr. Mo is going to meet up with boss now. Don't worry, Their plane is right in front, and the situation in front is under control. The minefields in this dense forest are likely to be detonated by those people. You are pregnant, so you can't smell the gunpowder. It's easy to hurt the baby. Come with me now. Although she didn't want to be separated from Emo Jinxian, she still sat in the helicopter obediently for the sake of the baby. Seeing Jinwan's current state, although she wasn't covered in wounds, she definitely wasn't in a good state. Although she wanted to ask her what she had experienced these days, she looked very tired and didn't want to talk too much, so Feng Ling didn't ask much. Anyway, it was good to make sure she was safe. However, Jinwan was in the helicopter. As the plane took off and landed very fast, she couldn't stand it. Her morning sickness worsened, so she ran into the bathroom in the cabin and vomited for a long time. In the end, Jinwan was helplessly helped out by Feng Ling sitting in the cabin. Feng Ling took a soft electric and put it on her back. Can you hold on? This helicopter is specially here to pick you up. I'll send you out right now. You'll feel much better after landing. Just bear with it. I'm fine. It's just morning sickness. I'm not sick, Jinwan said weakly. You don't have to send me out first. I'll wait for them with you. Feng Ling looked at her and didn't speak. She just helped her treat the wound on the back of her hand. Although she knew Jinwan was very tired, the burn on her hand was really terrible, so she asked, "Is this a burn? Why is it so hot?" "I did it on purpose. They asked me to send him food and set up a trap. Whether he eats or not, it's the worst result. In order to prevent him from facing this choice, I spilled the whole pot of boiling soup on my hand," Feng Ling said in a low voice. Feng Ling paused and frowned. She had been in the base for a long time and was surrounded by men. In the years she lived outside, most of the women she knew were ordinary women who didn't have particularly good self-defense skills. It was more accurate to say that they didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. But she had never seen someone like Jinwan. She didn't have any martial arts skills, was just a simple and pure woman, and was even pregnant. But in her bones, there was a yearning for life and faith in life, as if there was a light persistent and bright. Maybe you should let Mr. Mo make the choice. He must have a way to protect himself without hurting you, Feng Ling said. Jinwan was silent for a moment. Yes, if I throw this problem to him, he may deal with it very carefully. But I didn't think so much at that time, so I used the stupidest method. This is not a stupidest method. This may be a deep love. You'd rather be covered with scars than let the other party suffer any difficulties. Mrs. Mo, you've done a good job. When Feng Ling said this, she wrapped the gauze around her hand and suddenly remembered that in the Boston jungle, Li Nanheng was so injured that he couldn't even stand steadily, and even his breathing was irregular. However, when she was almost killed by those people, he still stood behind them with a gun like a god. He opened fire to help her. He stood there covered in wounds and didn't let her suffer any more injuries. Feng Ling had never figured out how Li Nanheng could still stand in that situation. How did he do it? At this moment, such a sentence suddenly burst out of her mouth. When she tied the gauze on the back of Jinwan's hand, she couldn't help but tighten her hands. As if there was an answer in her mind. Li Nanheng's feelings for her were not limited to liking her, right? Or even love. Thinking of this word, Feng Ling's heart skipped a beat. 4M. Chapter 1168. Due to Jinwan's insistence, the plane took off and landed, landing in a safe spot in the middle of the dense forest. Seeing that Jinwan was very tired, Feng Ling took care of her for a while and allowed her to rest in the cabin. Seeing that Jinwan had fallen asleep, Feng Ling watched over her by the side. The sky gradually darkened. Mr. Mo came over. Feng Ling saw that Jinwan had also woken up. After reminding her, she walked out, leaving the space for the two of them. The two of them had just been through a great calamity and survived a desperate situation. They must have a lot to talk about. It was really inappropriate for her to be here. After leaving the cabin, Feng Ling had been guarding outside the plane. From time to time, she would look at the fire and flashlight near the wooden houses not far away. Occasionally, When she heard some strange movements, she would subconsciously grip the gun behind her and look around coldly. After confirming that there were no problems, she retracted her hand and continued to quietly lay by her side. However, her fingers still paused slightly. Ever since she woke up this morning, there had been a strange feeling in her palm. That feeling was very strange. She lowered her head to look at her hand and felt that there was nothing special. She touched it with her hand and found that it was not hot. In the darkness of the night, the sounds of insects and birds chirping could be heard. Feng Ling placed her hand down and quietly guarded outside the plane. Not long after, Officer N suddenly sent someone over. Feng Ling then turned back to the cabin. The moment she entered, she abruptly saw that Mr. Mo had already taken off his blood-stained shirt. With just a quick glance, Feng Ling very consciously and decisively took a step back. She did not enter but stood outside to say, "Mr. Mo, Officer Entz, who is in charge of the American police this time, is looking for you." "Got it," Mo Jingshan replied mildly. After a while, Mr. Mo had put on his clothes again. He was still wearing the blood-stained black shirt, but Jin Wan had helped him deal with the wound. Although the man's face seemed to be seriously injured, Mo Jingshan and Li Nanheng were actually the same kind of people. They both had high self-control and forbearance. No matter how serious and painful the injury was, they would not show any pain on their faces. He just walked out with indifferent eyes as if the wound on his body were not his. Seeing that Mo Jingshan had left, Jin Wan was worried and was about to come out. Feng Ling couldn't let anything happen to her now, so she rushed over and blocked the cabin door. "Mrs. Mo, rest inside. Don't come out." Jin Wan could only shrink her head back. After saying a few words to the two police officers outside, Feng Ling re-entered the plane. "Not going to sleep?" Seeing Jin Wan still sitting there, she asked. "N." Jin Wan leaned against the wall. "Feng Ling, I feel like I'm watching a movie these days," Feng Ling smiled. "How can I see my hands covered in wounds while watching a movie? At least he survived, didn't he? At least Mo Jingshan is safe." "That's true," Feng Ling said lightly. "I've been on missions in the base these years and seen too many deaths. Being alive is indeed more important than anything else." Jin Wan smiled as if she didn't want to talk about such a heavy topic in advance. However, because she knew that Li Nanheng and Feng Ling came to rescue together, she suddenly teased her about Li Nanheng. Then Jin Wan mentioned the contraceptive pill in T-City last time. Feng Ling recalled the scene when Li Nanheng angrily pressed her against the door and bit her for a long time because of that contraceptive pill and said, "Forget it." Jin Wan smiled. "I'm really curious about how you and Nanheng got along. You used to be brothers. What's the meaning of this?" Feng Ling was expressionless. "Now we're still brothers." "Really?" Jin Wan smiled. "Why do I feel that you treat him as a brother, but he treats you as his woman?" Feng Ling coughed and subconsciously changed the topic. "Mrs. Mo, your hand was wet just now, wasn't it?" "N. Why don't I disinfect your hand again?" "Forget it. It hurts." Jin Wan put her hand behind her back. But Jin Wan clearly felt Feng Ling's indifferent character. Although she didn't know what Feng Ling was like when she was in the United States, at least after meeting Feng Ling in High City, she found that as long as Li Nanheng was mentioned in front of her, she could only maintain her composure on the surface. But in fact, she could see that she was a little irritable. Except for Li Nanheng, there seemed to be no one else who could make Feng Ling irritable. The matter in the jungle came to an end for the time being. On the way back, Jin Wan and Mr. Mo were in this plane. Feng Ling was supposed to accompany and take care of them dutifully. After all, the two of them were injured, and when they were in High City, she had long been used to seeing them show off their affection every day. It didn't matter if she was a third wheel for a while. Anyway, as soon as they landed on the ground and returned to the camp, she would immediately disappear. But just before the plane was about to take off, as soon as she put on the headphones in the cabin, she heard Li Nanheng's voice. "Feng Ling, come to plane 1. Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan didn't wear headphones, so of course they didn't hear it. Feng Ling turned her eyes to the two people who were still sitting there hand in hand and didn't know what they were talking about. Then she looked at the member of the police rescue team in the driver's seat. Before she spoke, She heard Li Nanheng's voice in the headphones again. Don't dawdle. I'll give you 1 minute to arrive at plane 1. She didn't know why he suddenly ordered her to go there. But now even if she left, there shouldn't be any danger approaching Jinwan. So she put down the headphones and got off the plane. She quickly walked to the plane 1 where Li Nanheng took. As soon as she walked over, the cabin door suddenly opened. Looking at the open door, she stepped up. As soon as she entered, she saw that this plane 1 was obviously livelier than the ones behind it. Li Nanheng, Kay, and the others were all here, including the commander of the rescue team sent by China and Officer Entz from the United States. This helicopter was very large and could accommodate at least 17 or 18 people. Right now there were 7 or 8 people in it. It didn't look crowded, but it was indeed very lively. Feng Ling didn't understand why she was suddenly called here. After entering, someone came over to help her close the cabin door behind her. Li Nanheng was talking to Officer Entz. Hearing that she came, he turned to look at her and saw that she was standing there motionlessly. Why are you standing there? We're about to take off. Aren't you afraid of falling? Come and sit down. With that, the man casually patted the seat beside him. Feng Ling looked at the others, walked over, and sat down in the seat he had just patted. When she sat down, she turned to look at Li Nanheng. When the man noticed her gaze, he lowered his eyes to look at her. Their eyes met. Although Feng Ling didn't speak, it was clear that there was a question in her eyes. Why did he call her to plane 1? 4M. Chapter 1169. Before she could ask, Kay suddenly said, Aya, Feng Ling, is your EQ so low? Mr. Mo and Mrs. Mo just survived a desperate situation. The couple must have a lot of private things to talk about. Even if they don't treat you as an outsider, when you're around, they must have some feelings that they can't express. You've been on plane 6. If Bosley hadn't called you over, would you have flown back with them on plane 6? Feng Ling. Mr. Mo's injuries are very serious. He doesn't seem to have much energy. Then the couple's lingering eyes are enough for you, okay? It's not dangerous. You don't have to guard Mrs. Mo all the time. Is it because of Mrs. Mo's disappearance a few days ago that you're traumatized? Feng Ling didn't answer, but it was true. Last time, it was in T-City. This time, it was in Cambodia. Although there were reasons for Jin Wan's disappearance, in the final analysis, she believed that she should blame herself for not protecting Jin Wan well enough. It was her own lack of ability. She was indeed afraid that something would happen to Jin Wan again. But she didn't expect that these people thought she was an ignorant third wheel, and even specially asked Li Nanheng to urge her to come over. She didn't speak again. After Li Nanheng finished speaking with Officer Entz, he smiled and shook hands with him. When he withdrew his hand, he directly sat on the seat on her side. The arrangement of seats in this helicopter was not the kind of small single seat. There were long and wide seats. Even the seats Mr. Entz and the others were sitting on were 2 sofa chairs along the cabin wall. The seat Feng Ling was sitting on was called a single seat, but it was not exactly. If 2 people really squeezed together, it could actually fit 2 people. Li Nanheng was now squeezing into her seat. The point was that he sat down next to her. And in order to make the 2 of them sit more comfortably, he put his arm on the back of the chair behind her casually. It looked like he was holding her in his arms, but the other people sitting here were not surprised at all. They just very consciously turned their heads away, chatting and doing their own things. Feng Ling. She glared at the man beside her. Looking at her fierce face, Li Nanheng sighed in his heart. She was as obedient as a kitten after drinking too much last night. At that time, she was so drunk that in the end, she was very obedient and did whatever he asked her to do. She used her hands to help him toss around for most of the night without saying a word. Now that he was sober, he put on an unapproachable attitude. Li Nanheng casually placed his hand on her back and placed it on her shoulder. At the same time, his slender fingers gently flicked her shoulder. Feng Ling stared at him, clearly glaring at him, warning him not to mess around in front of so many people. However, on this side, Li Nanheng just squeezed next to her, half put his arm around her shoulder, and only smiled. His smile made her feel a little strange. Strangely, she felt that her face seemed to be instinctively heating up. At this time, the other people chatted as if nothing had happened. It was very obvious that no one would disturb them or pay attention to them. It was as if no one would interrupt them, even if they casually talked about love. Li Fengling was about to speak, but at this moment, the man lowered his head, leaned close to her ear, and said in a voice that only she could hear, "You didn't sleep well last night. After getting up, you entered the dense forest. Are you tired?" Fengling's expression faltered, and she glanced at him. "How do you know I didn't sleep well last night?" In order to prevent her from finding out that he had trained her last night, Li Nanheng casually turned to look at the night sky outside the cabin and said in a low voice, "I saw that you drank last night. When you went back, you didn't sleep well. Who took off my clothes last night?" "You." The man lowered his eyes to look at her. "Do you think anyone else dares to touch you?" Seeing that he only took off her coat, Fengling endured it. "Then I." Then she. The words were about to come out of her mouth, but she forcibly held them back. What should she ask? Did she do anything after drinking too much last night? She didn't know what she was like after drinking too much, but she didn't hear anyone mention anything, and it seemed that every time she drank too much, it was in front of Li Nanheng. She wondered what she did last night. What should she ask? Why did her hands feel so sore when she woke up in the morning? She vaguely thought of a possibility in her mind, but she felt that Li Nanheng shouldn't be so shameless. Yesterday Mr. Mo and Mrs. Mo hadn't been rescued yet. He shouldn't be so careless as to force her to do that kind of thing. Besides, the soundproofing here was not good, and the bathing environment was not good. But her hands were sore all day, and she really wondered what she did last night. "What do you want to ask?" Even though the man was sitting in the same seat as her, even though they were sitting side by side, he was still a little taller than her. He looked at her with his eyes lowered, and there was a hint of smile and eagerness in his calm eyes that others couldn't understand. "After you sent me back to sleep last night, you left, right? Nothing happened?" She didn't want to ask too directly, but she still wanted to ask if there was anything else she didn't remember. The answer the man gave her was to raise his good-looking brows. She couldn't move her eyes away for a moment until she heard him say, "What do you want to happen?" Then it should be that nothing happened. After all, in the morning, she was still wearing her clothes, and her lower body didn't seem to be any different. She coughed and felt a little embarrassed by the man's gaze that was too close to her. She turned her head away from him and looked at Kay and the others, only to see that Kay and the others were chatting and hadn't looked in this direction. Looking at this woman who would deliberately keep a distance from him as long as she was sober, Li Nanheng was not anxious or annoyed. Anyway, last night when she was drunk, he had already learned everything he needed to know. Even if this girl put on a layer of disguise, she would always be transparent in front of him. He sat quietly by her side, and when he heard Officer Ince's words, he turned his eyes and talked to him mildly. Today, they had fought in the jungle for half a day. Although they had captured all the people that should be captured, there were still 2 important people who had escaped. However, they couldn't escape this forest. It was estimated that there would be a fierce battle at any time, and they needed to return to the camp immediately to recuperate. Li Nanheng didn't continue to say more. He just held Fengling's shoulder in this posture, and didn't let go for a long time. This posture couldn't be more natural, as if Fengling would stay by his side, in everyone's eyes. 4M. Chapter 1170. From Fengling's point of view, it didn't seem strange. It seemed that everyone knew it. It seemed that no one was surprised. It also seemed that everyone accepted it. There were no objections, and there were no messy gossips. This made Fengling suddenly reconsider in her heart. In addition, Jinwan occasionally hinted in front of her, which made Fengling feel that she should face up to the relationship between her and Li Nanheng. As a result, her body, which was a little stiff in Li Nanheng's arms, gradually softened and slowly relaxed. As if noticing the subtle change of the woman in his arms, Li Nanheng glanced at her calmly, only to see that she was sitting obediently by the side and didn't hide. but just lowered her head thoughtfully. His lips curled up slightly, and his arms tightened on her shoulders. It was as though he had unintentionally pulled her body into his embrace, until he hugged her even tighter just like that. Probably because she suddenly relaxed. Feng Ling had been tense and didn't sleep much these days because of Jin Wan. Last night, she seemed to have fallen asleep after drinking, but she didn't sleep well and felt very weak all over. She felt both physically and mentally relaxed. The refreshing smell and sense of security of the man surrounded her, so she unconsciously leaned her head on the man's arm until she fell asleep. Kay and the others chatted, and when they looked back, they saw that Feng Ling had fallen asleep. They immediately pointed in her direction, indicating that she had fallen asleep. The little woman's entire body suddenly softened, and she leaned against him. How could Li Nanhing not notice it? He lowered his head to take a look and held her tighter. At the same time, he leaned down slightly, so that she could rest more comfortably in his arms. In the eyes of others, these movements seemed as if nothing had happened, but only Feng Ling, who was half asleep, could sense the man's exquisite gentleness. Similarly, only Li Nanheng could feel her leaning more tightly in his arms and sinking deeper. Everything happened in a quiet state, but it seemed that there was something more silent than sound in their hearts. Feng Ling closed her eyes and let herself continue to sleep against him, and the man was willing to hold her like this. Seeing that boss didn't speak and didn't intend to carry Feng Ling to the temporary bed in the cabin next door to sleep, Kay simply stopped talking and continued to talk to the people next to him. The helicopter landed outside the dense forest. In order not to wake up Feng Ling, Li Nanheng winked at Kay and told him to take care of Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan. After all, Mo Jingshan was seriously injured and needed the two base doctors to help him deal with the injury on his back and the burn on Jin Wan's hand. However, since the contract between Dr. Wan and the base expired, the base hadn't found a particularly suitable doctor. Although the doctors who came with them were good, they were far inferior to Dr. Wan and Qin sighting, so of course they had to be disinfected of time. They had to wait until they flew back to the United States to treat their treatment. After explaining everything, everyone else got off the plane, leaving only the two of them crammed into one seat in the spacious cabin. Li Nanheng didn't move, and Feng Ling gradually fell into a deep sleep. He just sat there, and she had been quietly leaning against him. After a while the man moved slightly. He lowered his eyes to look at her sleeping face. He raised his hand and touched her cheeks, which were warm from her sleep. Indeed, it was time to sleep. She had been worried about Jin Wan. If she didn't sleep now, she would probably have to help Jin Wan after getting off the plane. Even if Jin Wan would feel sorry for her and ask her to rest, with Feng Ling's character, she would never go to sleep until she saw that Jin Wan was ready to sleep. Looking down at her for a long time, Li Nanheng slowly bent down, put one hand through her knees, and the other hand on her back, lifted her up. When Feng Ling was about to wake up, he suddenly lowered his head and whispered in her ear, "Go to sleep. Everything is safe. Have a good sleep." She didn't know if his words worked or if Feng Ling was dreaming, but after frowning, the man held her firmly in his arms. Her brows gradually relaxed and she continued to sleep. Even when the man carried her off the plane and walked past the base brothers, who were shocked to the point their jaws almost dropped, she didn't wake up. Kay and the others were used to the things between Boss Li and Feng Ling. Even if they were curious and surprised, they didn't dare to show too much. But when the other brothers saw this scene, they all opened their mouths and stood there for a long time. When Boss carried Feng Ling into the tent, they gathered in groups of 3 or 5 and muttered, "Oh my God, Feng Ling has such a delicate side. There may be a fierce battle outside at any time, and there are minefields all around, but she can still sleep so soundly, and she was carried out by Boss." Cough. For a man like Boss Li, any woman in his arms must be delicate, okay? Even Feng Ling is only a few centimeters taller than most girls. How tall is she? Is she 1.7 meters tall? Many female models are 1.8 meters tall. It's not surprising that she has such a delicate side in Boss's arms. Why isn't it strange? When has she ever treated Boss coldly? Our boss has almost been tortured by her to the point of having a deep hatred for her. But today she actually seems a little sweet. Boss has been chasing her for so long. It's time to get some benefits, right? Li Nanheng had already entered the tent with Feng Ling in his arms, leaving all kinds of whispers behind him, and carried Feng Ling all the way back to her small room. As soon as he walked into her room, the memories of last night came flooding back like a tide. The man's body also had a more obvious memory of this place. Thinking of the little woman holding his hand yesterday, Li Nanheng restrained himself on the surface and gently placed her on the bed. However, perhaps because this bed was still a simple folding bed, it was a little hard. At least, it was not as comfortable as in his arms. Perhaps Feng Ling subconsciously felt that she was back, so she suddenly opened her eyes. The man maintained the posture of putting her on the bed. Seeing that she woke up and even sat up abruptly, he pressed her shoulder lightly. "All right, don't get up. Go back to sleep. I've asked Kay to send hot water to Emo Jingshan. There are doctors in the base. You don't need to help. Now all you have to do is to sleep." Indeed, it's time for Li Cute to receive some benefits, right? I'm looking for monthly votes. I want to chat with more like-minded people about the warm wind is not as deep as your love. I want to chat about life and find a bosom friend. 4M. Chapter 1171. Feng Ling was really sleepy. She hadn't slept well in the past few days. Hearing his words and seeing the man's movements by the bed, she instinctively looked at his clothes and found that she had just been carried out of the helicopter by him. Since she didn't need to go to Mrs. Mo for the time being, she didn't have to worry about it anymore. Feng Ling didn't speak, closed her eyes, and continued to sleep as he said. But when she fell asleep, she gently pressed Li Nanheng's hand on her shoulder. Seeing her subtle movement, Li Nanheng sat by the bed with a faint smile on his lips. If it weren't for the fact that he really wanted her to have a good rest, he would have picked her up from the bed, held her in his arms, and kissed her hard. No hurry. He could kiss her when she woke up. Taking advantage of the way she pressed his hand, the man simply sat by the bed and did not leave. Instead, he held her hand in his palm. Feng Ling was half asleep, but she did not pull her hand out. Instead, she peacefully closed her eyes and quietly allowed him to hold her hand and accompany her by the bed. For her, especially for her after 3 years, this was a big step forward. Even if it was a very subtle change, Li Nanheng could feel her heart. Feng Ling turned over slightly and tilted her head inwards, but she didn't pull her hand out of his palm. Looking at her sleeping posture, Li Nanheng stretched out his other hand to push back the loose hair that covered her eyes and brows. "Go to sleep. After we leave Cambodia, things will come to an end." Feng Ling didn't speak. After a while, she breathed evenly again and really fell asleep. The next day, Dolly, who had escaped in the chaos, set up an ambush in the jungle. Early in the morning, Emo Jingshan rushed to the jungle, and all the people in the camp were ready to go in to rescue the 8 poor children who had been kidnapped. When Feng Ling learned of the situation, she wanted to go with them. But before boarding the plane, Li Nanheng told her to stay here to protect Jinwan today, and not to go inside to help. As long as she protected Jinwan, there would be no problem on Emo Jingshan's side. Knowing the seriousness of the matter, Feng Ling certainly believed in the strength of the other brothers of 11 Base. She looked back and saw Jinwan hurriedly coming out because she noticed the situation and went over to stop her. "Mrs. Mo, don't go there. A large area of minefield in the jungle has been detonated, and there will be continuous explosions. They have to go in to deal with the aftermath. You don't have to worry about it." "Then what are they going to do?" Jinwan noticed Emo Jingshan's serious eyes and was worried about his injury. Then he saw the rest of the people in the camp getting on the helicopter. Looking at the situation, it was no different from yesterday. It seemed like a tough battle was about to be fought. Did something happen inside? "I heard that their leader, the one called Akib, escaped." "Yes, but they won't be able to escape from this forest." Feng Ling briefly told Jinwan what she had just learned. After all, there was no way to hide anything now. The more she hid, the more it would cause Jinwan to speculate and panic, so she could only tell the truth. Mr. Mo went straight into the helicopter with his injury. Jinwan stared at him. Feng Ling knew she was uncomfortable, but she still had to stand in front of her. In fact, Feng Ling had come into contact with Akib and Dali's methods before. Their despicable and shameless actions often targeted innocent women and children. The fact that Mr. Mo had gone there with injuries showed how bad this matter was. Although Feng Ling firmly believed that the brothers of the base could wipe them out, she was still a little worried. After all, she was not at the scene, and women were naturally prone to worry. Just as Feng Ling was about to drag Jinwan back to the tent and take her inside to rest, Jinwan looked at the key on her waist and said, "I'm good at driving, and I've always been very flexible in controlling the direction. I heard that this kind of helicopter is not as complicated as a civil airliner. Do you think I can drive it?" Feng Ling didn't expect that Jinwan, who had no fighting ability at all, would have such courage after experiencing the thrilling events of the past few days. She paused. "Mrs. Mo, don't be impulsive. Feng Ling, my man, is there." Jinwan had experienced a life-and-death crisis. Now, no matter whether she was alive or dead, she had just reunited with Mo Jingxian. It had only been one night, and she had to face separation again. She absolutely couldn't bear it. Separated by this dense forest, she felt tormented even for 10 minutes. Besides, Mo Jingxian's injury was too serious. "No. Your man is also there." Feng Ling. Feng Ling was not impulsive, but she remembered what Li Nanheng said last night, sitting by her bed, that as long as they left Cambodia, this matter would come to an end. Indeed, after leaving they would be safe, but could they leave safely? It was said that one of the 8 children had been killed, and the others were injured. Mr. Mo would rush to save them regardless of the injury on his back. With Li Nanheng's temper, he would definitely take the responsibility. There were so many innocent children. If he was really desperate, it was not impossible for him to exchange his life for another's. The 2 women stood in the tent. Finally, one day, because of Jinwan's gaze, the words swayed by emotions were transferred to her head. Feng Ling was swayed by her emotions, so she took Jinwan straight into the dense forest. However, Feng Ling didn't expect that in this well-planned encirclement, she and Jinwan became the 2 people who Dali and Akib miscalculated. Especially Jinwan, a woman who had never held a gun before, stood at the back of the crowd. The unexpected shot broke the deadlock in the dense forest, giving 11 base and the police rescue team the best opportunity to besiege them. After finally solving the tricky situation, Feng Ling glanced at the back of Li Nanheng, who was going to rescue the children with Officer Entz. She turned around and was about to take Jinwan back to the helicopter, when she suddenly saw Mr. Mo angrily take Jinwan to the helicopter and teach her a lesson. Hearing Mr. Mo scolding Jinwan, Feng Ling was actually a little embarrassed. Today it was not only Jinwan who was emotional, but also she. However, there was a sudden bang in the air. A gunshot. Everyone ignored Akib, who had already fallen to the ground. He was covered with blood and his eyes were bloodshot, but he pretended to be dead. If Mr. Mo hadn't dodged in time with Jinwan in his arms, the bullet would have hit the metal wall outside the helicopter, or the consequences would have been unimaginable. Thankfully, Feng Ling was standing close at that time. She abruptly fired and hit Akib's wrist. She then expressionlessly walked toward Akib step by step, and shot him all over his body. Akib's body was riddled with holes, his entire body twitched, and he completely breathed his last breath. Chapter 1172. Although this journey was not very dangerous, it was really tiring to be stationed near Tunnel Sap Lake for a few days. After flying back to Los Angeles, they returned to the base. Feng Ling and Li Nanheng guarded the hospital with Kay and the others, and 11 Base sent some people to take turns to protect Mr. Mo and Mrs. Mo outside the ward area. Mr. Mo was seriously injured, but fortunately, the wounds were on his back, and there were no fatal wounds. However, according to Kay's description, it was said that Mr. Mo's back was dripping with blood. She didn't know what he had experienced in the jungle, Feng Ling felt sorry to see the burns on Jin Wan's hands every day. There were people taking care of Mr. Mo, so she seldom went there. She just accompanied Jin Wan, bought food for Jin Wan, and stayed outside her ward every day. She basically didn't need to do other things for the time being. After all, although she was in Los Angeles now, she was still Jin Wan's bodyguard, which was her main duty. Jin Wan went to Cambodia in a hurry and didn't bring any clothes. After coming back from there, she just bought 2 sets of clothes. Now she was in the hospital, and it was not convenient for her to change. While Jin Wan was accompanying Mr. Mo in his ward, Feng Ling went to the largest department store nearby to help buy some clothes and various skincare products that Jin Wan could use. However, Feng Ling had never used skincare products, and she remembered that Jin Wan seemed to use them very little. She stood in front of a skincare product counter, holding a bottle of essence and moisturizer recommended by the counter sister in her hand. She stared at it for a long time, but didn't understand it. The counter sister boasted about the efficacy of these skincare products for a long time, but she didn't understand it. She felt that all the advertisements on the side of the counter had the same efficacy. They all seemed to be magical and seemed to be able to rejuvenate. Feng Ling put down the things in her hand and turned back to continue to wander back and forth on the first floor of the department store. She didn't know much about these skincare products, but with how much Mr. Mo doted on Mrs. Mo, he would definitely buy the best for her. She didn't know which one was the best, so she just walked in front of each counter, trying to see if there was a more expensive one. But it turned out that there were more expensive ones. Even a thumb-sized bottle cost thousands of yuan. She looked all the way and found that there was no most expensive one, but more expensive one. And there were even more expensive ones that cost tens of thousands of yuan. At this time, Feng Ling finally understood what the brothers in the base meant when they teased each other, that finding a girlfriend was too expensive. She also understood why Ling Feifei would slap a bunch of skincare products on her face every day when she accompanied Jin Wan in T-City. She would also discuss skincare products with others and look at her complacent eyes. Jin Wan had once said, "Feng Ling, it's not like you're not beautiful. In fact, you can grow your hair a little longer and try to slowly live like a woman. Women don't need to be delicate, but you can't miss out on a woman's most beautiful years. Although short hair is also very beautiful, a woman has to experience long hair at least once in her life. She can't always treat herself as a man. She has to adapt to life as a woman bit by bit." At that time, Feng Ling just gave a faint smile and didn't take these words to heart. Now looking at these skincare products, and then looking at the fragrant young girls walking past him, he found that the perfume on each of them seemed to be different. The skincare products, cosmetics, and even the color of their lipsticks seemed to be different after a closer look. It seemed a bit difficult to be a woman through and through. Feng Ling stood in front of a very expensive skincare product counter, full of blue and gold bottles. Listening to the saleswoman bragging for a long time, she had to buy a few bottles casually, and some facial masks by the way, preparing to take them back to the hospital for Jin Wan to use. As for herself, forget it. She felt that it was more difficult to learn to be a woman than to go back to T-City to memorize business management formulas. Carrying the skincare products she had just bought, Feng Ling went upstairs and planned to buy a few more sets of clothes for Jin Wan. Walking around the mall, considering that it was cold outside, she looked around at the coats. Jin Wan liked to wear cashmere coats, which were warm and very suitable for her figure and temperament. Feng Ling had just walked into a brand store and was looking at a white coat inside, when suddenly she saw a middle-aged woman coming out of the fitting room. "Mrs. Feng, don't worry. This coat is very warm." The shop assistant accompanied the middle-aged woman out of the fitting room and chatted with her with a smile on her face. At the moment when Feng Ling turned around, the middle-aged woman also noticed that someone else seemed to have entered the store and subconsciously raised her eyes to look. Their eyes met and Feng Ling recognized that it was Mrs. Feng, Qin Qiu. Recently, Qin Qiu's physical condition was not very good, especially after Feng Mingzhu's accident in China. She was particularly noisy at home every day, and the Feng family worried about her every day. As a mother, Qin Xiu usually didn't care much about the family affairs, and her eldest daughter was also unruly, except for the two elders of the Feng family, who could suppress Feng Mingzhu's temper when they really got angry. Although Qin Xiu was a mother, she couldn't control her daughter, but it didn't mean that she didn't worry about her. Recently, the weather had been cold, and Mrs. Zhen, who was a family friend of hers, invited her out to see if there were any new coats sent from Paris this autumn and winter. It was nothing more than two elderly women going out for a walk. Qin Xiu was indeed bored at home for many days, and wanted to go out for a walk, so she simply came out. However, she had caught a cold a few days ago, and her throat was still hoarse. The moment she saw Feng Ling, her eyelids suddenly twitched. Back then, when she saw Feng Ling dressed in men's clothes, she didn't have any special feelings. At this moment, looking at Feng Ling, who was dressed in black sportswear, but didn't deliberately dress up as a man, Qin Xiu's hand that was holding the coat froze fiercely. "Mrs. Feng, are you sure you want this coat? Mrs. Zhen is still trying on another coat inside. Do you want to wait until she comes out and pay the bill or?" The saleswoman's words were still ringing in her ears, but Qin Xiu didn't hear it at all, and only stared at Feng Ling. When facing this Mrs. Feng, Feng Ling's heart was calmer than she thought. After all, just two jade pendants that could be clasped together could not completely prove anything. Although her guess was more than half likely, before the coffin was sealed, she could not be sure whether this Madame Feng was her mother or not. Chapter 1173. Moreover, Feng Ling wasn't ready to face her real identity. Qin Xiu's eyes were glued to her. No matter how slow Feng Ling was in understanding people's emotions, she could tell what the excitement in Qin Xiu's eyes was. Feng Ling withdrew her gaze, pretended not to see it, and turned to walk out. "Wait a minute." Seeing that she was about to leave, Qin Xiu suddenly called her with an excited and even shrill voice that she had never made in more than 10 years. She threw the coat in her hand back to the shop assistant and walked quickly over. Before Feng Ling was about to step out, she suddenly stepped forward and held her arm. "Child, wait a minute. Don't go." Qin Xiu held her back. Even though she was sick, cold, and weak, at this moment, she only felt that her whole body was full of strength. She was able to stop Feng Ling, who was very skilled and stable, from using too much force. Then she grabbed her arms with both hands and stood in front of her, looking at her face, looking at her hair that had grown longer than a few years ago, and then lowering her head to look at the outline of her body that belonged to a girl. Suddenly being scrutinized from head to toe by Madame Feng, Feng Ling stood rooted to the spot and watched this slightly agitated woman. Feng Ling, who had never thought of delving into her own background, and had never thought of acknowledging her as a relative, felt as though her heart had been ruthlessly pierced by something. She could have pushed her away expressionlessly, and then politely said that she had something to do. She could have avoided all the topics. But when she saw Mrs. Feng's eyes and felt the strength of her hand on her arm, she swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. "Child." The more she looked at her, the redder Qin Xiu's eyes became, and the more her voice trembled. "You are Feng Ling, right? The Feng Ling of 11 Base? The Feng Ling I met a few years ago? It's you, right?" In just a few years, the teenager had become like this. She was still as exquisite and beautiful, but she was obviously taller than a few years ago. She was no longer a young boy, but a tall and beautiful girl. A girl with short hair, a cold and indifferent temperament, and a very beautiful girl. Feng Ling's arm was about to hurt from her grip, but it was as though she could not feel the pain. She looked at the agitated Madame Feng in front of her, and composed herself before answering. "It's me." Qin Xiu's tears were about to fall. Back then, she had unintentionally heard those words at the same time as her mother. At that time, Feng Mingzhu had said that Feng Ling was a woman disguised as a man in 11 Base. At that time her heart trembled. She kept thinking about the face of the child named Feng Ling, thinking that the boy who didn't speak much and was somewhat cold was actually a girl. However, when he thought about how she was 1 year younger than his daughter, and how could there really be any miracle in the vast ocean? After that, she never saw Feng Ling again. Although she was worried and suspicious, she didn't have the chance to confirm anything. But today she saw it. With just one glance, even though Qin Xiu had doubts about Feng Ling's age, she could clearly feel that between the child's brows, there was not only the shadow of herself when she was young, but also the shadow of her husband when he was young. Only the closest people would be able to see the resemblance between this child's appearance and her husband's. If it was just her, it would be fine. But her husband, Feng Mingzhu's father, even Feng Mingzhu didn't look so much like him, but Feng Ling looked very much like him. They were two alike. Seeing that Feng Ling was standing in front of her and did not speak or move for a long time, perhaps frightened by her, Qin Xiu hurriedly restrained her emotions and withdrew her hand. However, as though unwilling to part with her, she hurriedly reached out to hold Feng Ling's hand and held it tightly in agitation. Feng Ling, don't be frightened by Auntie. Xiaoqiu, what's wrong? At this moment, Madame Sun had finished trying on the clothes and walked out. When she saw Qin Xiu holding onto a young lady's hand, she immediately walked over with a strange expression. Her gaze landed on Feng Ling's face, and she immediately turned to look at Qin Xiu in confusion. Madame Sun and Madame Feng were family friends and had known each other for many years. Madame Sun had seen Qin Xiu when she was young. She recalled how Qin Xiu would always be so agitated whenever she saw someone who resembled her. She had long gotten used to it. However, it was truly rare to see someone who resembled her so much. You guys chat. I'll go pay for the coat you were interested in, Madame Sun said, and did not disturb them anymore. She directly went inside to pay the bill. Qin Xiu nodded, but her gaze never left Feng Ling's face. Her hand continued to hold onto Feng Ling's hand tightly. Don't just stand there and not speak. Can you talk to Auntie? Can you talk? Feng Ling stood there for a long time. She wanted to free her hand, but it was held too tightly. When she saw Madame Sun's gaze, she could not bear to do so. After a long while she finally said, Madame Feng, you're a little agitated. Do you want to calm down first? She was so agitated that her hand was almost sweating. When Qin Xiu heard her words, she sobered up and quickly released her hand. When she lowered her head to see that the back of Feng Ling's hand was red, she immediately felt apologetic. She tried her best to control her emotions and took a step back. She smiled and said, Don't be frightened by me. It's just that Auntie hasn't seen you for many years. After all, we've known each other for so many years. Feng Ling did not speak again. Oh, by the way, have you eaten? I've eaten. Qin Xiu clenched her hand and looked at her without blinking. Then can Auntie treat you to a cup of coffee? Feng Ling was about to speak when her cell phone suddenly rang. She nodded politely to Madame Feng, and Qin Xiu hurriedly said, It's okay. Answer the phone. I won't disturb you. Let's talk after you answer the phone. Feng Ling picked up the cell phone and saw that it was Li Nanheng. She was a little helpless because of Madame Feng, but strangely she suddenly calmed down. She picked up the phone and put it to her ear. Boss, where are you? I came out to buy clothes for Mrs. Mo. Where? Was he coming over? Didn't he need to discuss things with Mr. Mo in the hospital? That was right. Now Mrs. Mo was in Mr. Mo's ward. Li Nanheng must have been stuffed with dog food and couldn't stay there any longer. Feng Ling said, In the department store nearest to the hospital. The signal on my cell phone is on. You can find the location. All right, I'll go over. After hanging up the phone, Feng Ling turned her eyes, only to see that Madame Feng, Qin Xiu, was still standing there. She seemed to be watching her as she answered the phone just now. Her eyes were full of hope, and she kept looking at her. Ask for monthly votes, babies. Heart to heart. Chapter 1174. Madame Feng. Feng Ling looked at her. In a moment, Boss Li will come over. You two should be considered old acquaintances. Hearing Feng Ling mention the so-called Boss Li, Madame Feng's thoughts remained on her. She did not think much about it. She then saw Feng Ling's female sportswear, and recalled that Li Nanheng and Feng Ling seemed to be very close in the past. Right now, this was not 11 base but a department store. Feng Ling was shopping here, And Li Nanheng actually came over. So between Feng Ling and Li Nanheng, thinking of that somewhat absurd marriage, Qin Xiu's eyes brightened. She looked at her with a smile. All right, I haven't seen Nanheng for a long time. Let's go for a cup of coffee. Auntie's treating, okay? Madame Feng's tone was too gentle, and there was a hint of caution in it. It was as though she was subconsciously afraid that Feng Ling would refuse and scare her away. Feng Ling really did not know how to face this situation. However, since Li Nanheng would come over, her heart was much more at ease. Seeing Madame Feng's fearful gaze, she finally nodded. All right. Qin Xiu instantly smiled. Then let's go across the street. There's a cafe opposite this department store. The environment is not bad. The environment is elegant and quiet. Feng Ling nodded lightly. Seeing her so gentle, quiet, and seemingly calm and obedient, Qin Xiu's eyes were almost filled with tears. However, she was really afraid of scaring this child, and forced herself to hold back. However, her eyes could not leave Feng Ling's face. If she was really her daughter, then the heavens really treated her too well. But what if she wasn't? If it was just a coincidence that they looked alike? After all, even an adult would have a hard time coming out alive after falling into the vast sea. How could a little 1-year-old child really have a miracle? After Madame Sun paid the bill for Madame Feng, she walked out with 2 bags. She leaned close to Madame Feng and whispered something. Madame Feng nodded and then shook her head, as though she was unable to suppress her emotions in front of an old sister she had known for many years. However, in the end, she still forcefully suppressed her emotions and said in a low voice, I do look very similar to me when I was young, right? Madame Sun turned to Feng Ling and replied in a low voice, They really do look alike. No wonder you're so agitated. In the past, whenever you saw a child who looked like you on the streets, your emotions would fluctuate for a long time. Now that you've met someone who looks so much like you, AI. But no matter how much they look alike, they're not your own children. 20 years have passed. It's time to let go. Qin Xiu's eyes suddenly fell on Feng Ling. Child, how old are you this year? Although he had asked this question a few years ago, it was as if he wanted to confirm something at this moment. Facing the woman who might be her mother, Feng Ling didn't know whether to tell the truth, or to tell the truth about the fake birthday that had been written on her identity card. I am past 20, she answered. Over 20? Then are you 21 years old? Qin Xiu's eyes trembled as she watched her. It was as though there was a thin needle right in front of her, hanging on the edge. With just a gentle blow, it might fall off completely, but it might also not fall off. Her gaze and her tone were so careful that Madame Sun, who was by the side, felt her heart ache for her. She could not bear to say another word. 21 years old? Was she already past 21 years old? Feng Ling was stunned. Before she could answer, Madame Sun's phone rang. Madame Feng abruptly returned to her senses when she heard the ringtone. She immediately felt that she had been too abrupt. She had chased after a young lady and asked all sorts of questions. Anyone in her position would be stunned. Madame Sun turned to answer the call. Madame Feng smiled at her. I just like you very much. I might have asked too many questions. Please don't mind it. I won't. Feng Ling saw the caution in her eyes and could not bear to continue. I just don't know how to answer you. I don't even know when my birthday is. The emotions that Madame Feng had just suppressed, and had just regained some calmness, were instantly thrown into turmoil. She resisted the urge to continue interrogating her. She only stared at her. You. Feng Ling looked at her sincerely. Madame Feng, before I entered Ping 11 base, I lived in an orphanage. They only recorded a temporary birth date for me. As for my actual birthday, I'm not sure. Qin Xiu's hands trembled. She stared at Feng Ling for a long time. Finally, Madame Sun returned from the call. She stood by her side and said, My son is here to pick me up. You have something to talk to this girl about, right? I'll be leaving first. Here are the clothes. You can take it as my repayment for the car repair fees you paid for me previously. After speaking, Madame Sun saw that Madame Feng was still standing there in a daze. She shook her head and stuffed the bag of clothes into Madame Feng's hands. She then turned to speak to Feng Ling. Little girl, don't be frightened by her. She's always been like this all these years, but I've never seen her so excited before. I can tell that she likes you very much. Why don't you accompany her for a while longer?" Feng Ling did not speak. She only nodded at Madame Xian. After Madame Xian left, Qin Xiu gripped the bag in her hands tightly. She took a deep breath and suddenly smiled. "What are the two of us standing here looking at? Let's go to the cafe now." "All right." Qin Xiu forcibly shifted her gaze away from her face. She turned and headed for the elevator. However, her movements were somewhat flustered. Something in her mind reminded her countless times. Feng Ling was a girl. She was an orphan. She had no parents. She did not know when her birthday was. She looked so much like herself and old Feng. This child's gentle and indifferent personality was extremely similar to her family's old lady when she was young. If it wasn't for the plastic bag in his hand, which blocked the strength of his nails, he wouldn't have been able to pinch anything for a long time. Otherwise, if he had clenched his hand too tightly, his nails would have pierced into his palm and bled. Just as the two of them walked out of the department store and were about to cross the bridge to the cafe across the road, at the foot of the stairs, Mrs. Feng, who had been staring ahead and thinking about something, suddenly tripped and almost fell. Feng Ling quickly stepped forward to support her. "Be careful." Suddenly, Feng Ling took the initiative to support her. Qin Xiu abruptly turned to look at her. When she abruptly saw Madame Feng's hopeful gaze, Feng Ling was momentarily at a loss. She was used to being free, and did not wish to acknowledge her family. Regardless of whether she was related to the Feng family or not, she had no intention of acknowledging her parents. But wasn't she being too selfish by doing this? What if her family had always been looking for her? What if she wasn't abandoned? What if she was the quickest to read? Chapter 1175. Afterward, Feng Ling supported Madame Feng as they walked across the bridge. Even though Madame Feng did not sprain her ankle and walked steadily, Feng Ling's hand continued to support her and did not let go. Madame Feng did not ask her to move her hand away. As she walked, she seemed to be thinking about something. Suddenly, a smile appeared in her eyes. When they were about to enter the cafe, she suddenly gently held Feng Ling's hand on her arm and said warmly, "Find a seat by the window. It'll be easier for Nanheng to see you when he comes looking for you." "All right." Feng Ling only agreed. Madame Feng glanced at her with a smile and led her in. After sitting down, Madame Feng ordered 2 cups of coffee from the waiter. One was an Americano, and the other was a latte. Of course, the latte was for Feng Ling. She guessed that Feng Ling probably did not drink much coffee in the base, and would not be used to bitter coffee. A latte was more suitable for her. All these years, Feng Ling did not know much about coffee. The only thing she could drink was a latte. However, she did not expect that Madame Feng, who appeared to be gentle and without any ideas, was actually so meticulous. "Do you like to eat desserts?" Qin Xiu asked her. "It's all right. I've eaten earlier and am not very hungry. I'll pass on the dessert." However, before she could finish speaking, Madame Feng called the waiter who had yet to leave. She ordered a chocolate cake, and after thinking for a moment, a blueberry cake. When the waiter quickly brought the coffee and cake over, Feng Ling thought that she wanted to eat too. However, Madame Feng pushed the 2 cakes in front of her. "I've tried all the cakes in this cafe. These 2 taste very good. You can eat whichever you like. There's no need to stand on ceremony with Auntie." So, a woman of Madame Feng's age also frequently came out to eat desserts? Thinking of Madame Xian, Feng Ling felt that if Madame Feng hadn't lost a daughter and been depressed for so many years, she would have been a very energetic and happy woman. She could tell just by looking at the personalities of her good friends. Even though they were getting on in years, she could tell that they were very open-minded. "Thank you, Madame Feng. Don't always call me Madame Feng. It's too distant." At this moment, Feng Ling's gaze was attracted by the 2 small cakes in front of her. She habitually reached out to the blueberry-flavored cake. She had just used a small fork to pick up a blueberry stained with cream when Feng Fu's gaze was fixed on her. Feng Ling paused under her gaze. She raised her eyes to look at her. "Madame Feng, Aren't you going to eat? You like blueberries? Feng Ling. From this conversation, Madame Feng's eyes seemed to have caught onto some common ground. Even if Feng Ling wasn't too sure about the relationship between the two sets of jade, she was now 80 to 90% certain that it was the case. You like to eat blueberries? If Madame Feng did not restrain her emotions, she should have added the word also. Yes, Feng Ling did not lie and directly admitted it. At the same time, she moved the blueberry cake over and placed it in front of her. She calmly admitted, I don't particularly like desserts, but I do like blueberry-flavored desserts. Madame Feng watched her for a long time. Watching Feng Ling lower her head to eat the cake, her eyes first brimmed with tears, and then she suddenly smiled. She suppressed her choking voice and said with a smile, It's good that you like it. You can eat as much as you want. Auntie will buy it all for you. Whatever you like, I'll buy it for you. In the future, can you come out often to sit with Auntie and eat together? To chat with me? Feng Ling's hand that was holding the fork paused. The sweetness in her mouth had yet to subside. She did not raise her eyes. She was afraid that if she raised her eyes to meet Madame Feng's gaze, her heart would immediately soften to the point where she could no longer control her emotions. Seeing that she lowered her head and did not speak, Madame Feng picked up the coffee and took a sip. The bitter taste calmed her down. When she placed the cup down, she softly said, Sir, how many people? All of a sudden, the door of the coffee shop opened and closed. The waiter's voice came from the other side. There's no need. I'm looking for someone. A man's clear and indifferent voice followed. Feng Ling and Madame Feng simultaneously turned toward the direction of the voice. They saw that Li Nanheng had already seen them at the door. He first glanced at Feng Ling, and then politely nodded to Madame Feng. He directly walked over with long strides. In the past 2 days after returning from Cambodia, she had not had the opportunity to sit down with Li Nanheng to talk. It was rare to see him in such an environment where there was nothing to deal with. Feng Ling subconsciously pursed her lips. She did not know why, but her heart rapidly thumped several times. Especially when the man walked to this table. His eyes were fixed on her. He did not shift his gaze away from her as he walked over. Nanheng, sit. When Madame Feng saw Li Nanheng, her mood became even better. She pointed to the seat beside Feng Ling. You're not an outsider. Sit there. Feng Ling did not pay much attention to how many layers of meaning were contained in the words, not an outsider. Li Nanheng glanced at Madame Feng and did not say anything. He only slightly curved the corners of his lips and easily sat down on the empty seat beside Feng Ling. Indeed, you're not an outsider. Feng Ling did not know that Li Nanheng already knew about her identity. She only thought that he was saying that she had been in 11 base for so many years and had always been one of them. Do you want to drink coffee? Feng Ling turned to ask him. Li Nanheng casually unbuttoned the 2 buttons on his coat and casually sat down by her side. He glanced at her and suddenly, with a hiss, sat slightly closer to her. Feng Ling thought that he was hurt somewhere and was about to ask, but the man suddenly leaned over and raised a finger to wipe the corner of her mouth. You can even wipe cream on the side of a cake. You're really promising. Feng Ling. Perhaps because Madame Feng was sitting opposite and watching them, Feng Ling, who was usually used to Li Nanheng's passionate attitude, suddenly felt her face burning. She abruptly raised her hand to wipe the corner of her mouth, but he had already wiped it clean, and there was nothing. She could only put down her hand, but for a moment, she did not know where to put her hand. Even if they wanted to show off their affection, they should look at the occasion, okay? Madame Feng was still here, and this coffee and cake was also Madame Feng's treat. Feng Ling secretly gave him a look, indicating for him to not sit so close to her, to sit further away, and to restrain himself. However, the man did not seem to understand her gaze. He politely greeted Madame Feng and cleared his throat. As though he was a little thirsty, he turned to look at her. Why didn't you drink your coffee? Hurry up and read the latest update. Chapter 1177. I'm not letting go. Li Nanheng did not lower his voice, and calmly tightened his grip on her hand. Feng Ling was exasperated. She wished she could throw the uneaten piece of chocolate cake at his face. Madame Feng watched the two of them flirting. Although she could not bear to stand up and leave, she still insisted on asking more questions. She wanted to confirm something. However, she could feel that she was an eyesore, so she stood up and said, "Please take a seat. I'm going to the bathroom." Feng Ling hurriedly turned to nod politely at Madame Feng. After Madame Feng turned and walked away, the man by her side lifted her hand. She placed her hand on the table, and he continued to hold her hand. When she withdrew her hand, he only moved his fingers slightly to hold her wrist. He did not allow her to move too far away. "Wasn't your attitude quite good earlier?" The man sat very close to her. Even though he did not deliberately move his voice closer, when he spoke, it was as though his voice was right by her ear. Of course, Feng Ling wanted to maintain a good attitude and speak to him properly. However, the man's arrogant attitude in front of Madame Feng clearly showed that he did not place anyone else in his eyes. He was really too arrogant. So arrogant that her heart kept beating wildly. The man tugged her hand back and stubbornly placed it on his lap. He seemed to like the way she leaned against his chest and gently placed her hand on his lap. It was almost as though he was relying on her. "I thought that after returning from Cambodia, you had already thought of how to treat me well." In the end, Li Nanheng raised his brows slightly and glanced at her hand that was forcefully held on his lap. "Is this how you thought of treating our relationship after coming back and being busy for the past few days?" Feng Ling faltered and abruptly pulled her hand out from under his palm. She did not speak. Madame Feng naturally could not have really gone to the bathroom. After a while, she had yet to return. It was likely that she did not wish to leave early, but did not wish to disturb the young people's love life. Thus, after a while, there were only the two of them at the table. In this moment of silence, Feng Ling sorted out her emotions and suddenly fell silent. There was a moment of silence. "What are you thinking about?" Li Nanheng did not touch her again, but rubbed the empty coffee cup on the table with one hand. Feng Ling felt that this wasn't a suitable place to say such things. Furthermore, Mrs. Feng might come over at any time. But when the words were on the tip of his tongue, he saw the man sitting patiently by his side. Earlier, even though he clearly knew that the woman was Madame Feng, he had exposed their relationship without any hesitation. He did not even give him the slightest chance to retreat. After waiting for a while, and seeing that Madame Feng still hadn't come out, the man's arm on the back of her chair had almost reached her shoulders. She suddenly turned her face and looked him in the eye. "Li Nanheng, let's find a time to go on a date." Li Nanheng had just received a glass of lemon water from a passing waiter. He had just taken a sip when he suddenly spat it out. He choked and coughed several times before turning his eyes back to her in disbelief. "What did you just say? Go on a date?" "I've thought about it. Since I can't avoid or escape, and I'm destined to be entangled with you like this, I might as well face up to your position in my heart." Feng Ling tried to make her voice sound calmer and calmer. "It's been several years since we started entangling with each other in the base. It's time to put it on the table." Seeing that she wanted to face it calmly, Li Nanheng's lips curved into a faint smile. "So, by putting it on the table, do you mean that you're officially going to be my woman?" Feng Ling originally wanted to correct him and say that she was his girlfriend. However, the words choked in her throat. She felt that it wasn't far from the truth. It was just a difference of 2 words and 3 words. What was truly important was still this man. Thus, the topic of her words changed slightly and became, "Let's not talk about anything else first. Tell me the truth about what you did to me in the Cambodian camp that night." Li Nanheng's smile that was about to reach his ears suddenly faltered because of her attempt to get closer to him. Looking at her eyes, it was clear that she had already guessed something. He coughed, raised his hand into a fist, and put it to his mouth. He cleared his throat and continued to cough a few more times, but did not answer. "What exactly did you do to me that night?" What else could he do? After being raised by him for so many years, he could only look at her but not eat her. There were several times when he couldn't control his desire and almost pounced on her. In the end, either because she was young or because of various emergencies, he was too busy to do anything to her. It wasn't easy for him to have sex, but because of the Cambodian incident, it was delayed for so long. In the middle, he was still as poor as a monk. Later, he finally held her in his arms and had a good sleep with her, but she happened to be on her period. Still, he could only look at her but not eat her. That night he did go a little crazy. If it weren't for the last bit of rationality he had, he might have done something as shameless as fighting a bloody battle. However, he made her tired for an entire night. Later, he secretly washed her uncomfortable hands with hot water for a long time. After making sure that they were clean, he finally let go of her. That night, he was so ruthless. But he was forced to the extreme by this little vixen, and had no choice but to be ruthless. Based on what he did at that time, it was indeed not surprising that her hands would still have some lingering feelings the next day. Why don't we continue to talk about the date? Let's not talk about it. Didn't you just start the topic? Madame Feng came out of the bathroom. When she walked back, Feng Ling turned to look at her. She saw that although she was smiling, her eyes seemed to be a little red. She had cried in the washroom by herself. Why was she crying? She didn't seem to have shown much of her relationship with the Feng family. Even if Madame Feng had some guesses and suspicions, she shouldn't have been so sure. However, it was clear that she had cried. Although she had simply applied some powder under her eyes to hide the traces of her crying, even though the skin around her eyes was covered, her eyes were still red. It seemed like the only thing that could make an elderly woman happy, the only thing that could make her cry, were all related to Feng Ling. Feng Ling's views on family were very weak. Although she wanted to say something to Madame Feng, because she wasn't completely sure of her own identity, she chose to keep her mouth shut. Chapter 1178. Afterward, Feng Ling could not remember what they talked about. She only remembered that Madame Feng repeatedly invited her to visit the Feng family. The reason why Feng Ling's mind was not completely focused on this conversation was because not only was Li Nanheng still holding onto her hand, he had also whispered something obscene to her before Madame Feng returned to sit down. His words were so vulgar and explicit that Feng Ling's head immediately began to fume with anger. Madame Feng, I'm sorry. If not for Madame Feng's presence, she would definitely have killed him. During this time, she glared fiercely at the man beside her several times, but Li Nanheng only smiled the entire time. Although the words he said earlier were extremely shameless, he could still smile faintly and say some pleasantries to Madame Feng. In the end, even though Madame Feng was reluctant to part with them, she was too embarrassed to continue chatting with the two of them. She repeatedly reminded Feng Ling to find more opportunities to eat and drink with her in the future. After receiving Feng Ling's approval, she finally left the coffee shop with a few steps back. After confirming that Madame Feng had left, Feng Ling instantly erupted in anger. She lowered her voice and cursed in a low voice. "This shameless scoundrel, you!" In response, Li Nanheng turned her head around and lowered his head to kiss her urgently and accurately. The man did not hide his lustful gaze at all. It was as though if this wasn't a coffee shop, and if there weren't waiters walking around in public, he would have directly stripped her on the spot. What did he say by her ear earlier? That night, you seduced me yourself. In the end, you were still on your period. In order to make me sleep with you, you would rather use your hands to help me. Your hands were so soft, and you kept holding on to me, refusing to let go. Your legs were wrapped around me. Tell me, could I have refused? The man kissed her lips and held her face to prevent her from moving away. Couples often met in this coffee shop. Occasionally, when their feelings reached a certain level, it was common for them to suddenly hug and kiss each other. Although Li Nanheng's kiss was very aggressive, it was not just a light kiss. His kiss contained countless long-hidden desires. The heat and turbulence made Feng Ling wonder if she would be directly taken away by him and swallowed into his stomach. In order not to disturb them, the waiters who were passing by didn't even look in their direction. After being bitten by this bastard for a while, Feng Ling tried to push him away. However, she could not push him away, so she used her fingers to pinch his fingers. The man did not feel any pain. Instead, he held her hand tightly and pressed it against his waist. He then lowered his head and took a deep breath against her ear. His breath landed on the sensitive part of her neck, causing her body to tremble violently. Li Nanheng. Yes, Nanheng. Seeing that he was still leaning against her neck without moving, his breath tickling her neck, she raised her voice slightly. Yes, there are people here, don't. Before she could finish speaking, the man suddenly pulled her hand down and pressed it against his crotch. Even through his pants, the warmth of her palm could still be felt. At this moment, the man almost couldn't help but moan. Li Nanheng didn't speak much, but the light in his eyes was somewhat crazy. Since that night in Cambodia, when this woman admitted that she liked him and told him everything in her heart, he couldn't describe his desire for her. However, after returning to Los Angeles, because Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan were in the hospital, 11 Base still had many things to deal with the American police, and Feng Ling had been staying in Jin Wan's ward for several days. At this moment, something that had been suppressed for a long time almost burst out at this moment. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was so hard that it hurt. Why was this a coffee shop? When he called earlier, he should have asked her to find a hotel room and wait for him instead of accompanying her to meet Madame Feng. Madame Feng would not hurt her. What was there for him to worry about? What kind of bullshit gentlemanly rule was that? Facing a girl he had loved for so long, and who actually had the same feelings for him, he only wanted to do one thing right now. He wanted to press her on the bed and make love to her. He wanted her stubborn eyes that almost never shed tears to redden because of him. He wanted her to lie on the bed crying and begging for mercy. He wanted her to take back the coldness that she always carefully maintained in front of others. He wanted to squeeze out all her rationality. He wanted to hear her call his name in a different tone, the kind that was a little mute, a little begging, and a little sobbing, calling his name. He was intoxicated under the glass table in the cafe, pressing her hand down through his pants. No matter how hard she tried to pull her hand away, he wouldn't let her pull her hand away. He continued to press on top of her, rubbing himself against her. The burning sensation on her cheeks made Feng Ling feel as though she was about to burst into flames. There were so many people here. How dare he? Right now, the man could not care less about her embarrassment and shyness. His muscles tightened and he pressed hard against her. But he could not extinguish the fire that had been hidden in his body for a long time. The fire burned in his heart. His primitive nature and deeply hidden feelings drove him to kiss her neck. He then held her chin with one hand and kissed her heavily on the lips. Let's go to the hotel. Baby, I can't wait anymore. He murmured hoarsely against her lips. If you don't help me resolve this little fire, I can only get hard every time I see you. I can't speak clearly at all. Let's go to the hotel first. Before the last bit of rationality disappeared, Li Nanheng muttered hoarsely as he pulled her up. Feng Ling could not free herself from his hand. Her face was burning hot. She clearly should have warned him not to act recklessly. But under this shyness, even her heart was vaguely looking forward to it. This feeling of her heart being scalded to the point of trembling was very strange. However, as soon as the man pulled her out of the coffee shop, the cell phone in his pocket suddenly rang. Feng Ling felt that the man's grip on her hand was very strong. Obviously, even if the sky collapsed, it could not stop him from wanting to go to the hotel immediately. The hospital and the business district were nearby, and it was still very far from his residence. There was no other choice but to go to the hotel. Feng Ling did not speak. In fact, when she was taken out of the coffee shop by the man, her brain had already stopped working. It was not until the phone in his pocket quieted down and rang again that she reminded him. Is there something urgent? Answer the phone first. What urgent thing? Is it more urgent than me? The man was too lazy to take out his cell phone. After all, we are in Los Angeles now. You are the boss of 11 Base. What if the military or the police have something urgent to say? Answer the phone first. It won't delay anything. that you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.